And it's recording there. Okay. And basically just want to introduce myself. So I really do appreciate everyone carving out time for yourself to really learn about this particular module, which is recruitment and selection, and of course, help you along your path as you study and get ready for your CPC. I've been in the industry now for a little over 18 years with the same company the whole time. I've been with Applin. I'm based out of Winnipeg. And I've been in a training capacity with ACSESS now for about 4 to 5 years, and generally been working in a training and development capacity for about 8 years. And I'm really excited that I could take you through this module. It's going to be very interactive. I'm hoping it could be interactive, as I'll be asking, questions. There'll be opportunities to type things into chat. And so if you haven't already done so, it's a good time to take a look at your emails and try to turn off notifications, to try to turn off your cell phone, and to really focus on the learning for today. Another question that I wanted or thing I wanted to put out there is, I am hearing some background noise. If there's anyone that, make sure that you take a look and see if your phone is on mute. I could also just do that directly as well, just to make sure that you are muted. If you wanted to ask a question, by all means, feel free to put it into chat or to come off mute and ask questions. Really, again, take lots of notes during this session. We're going to cover a lot of things. You do have the workbook there that you were sent, so feel free to take notes along there. And like I said, ask questions along the way. This is your time to learn about recruitment and selection in this realm. Something I'd love to learn about is your experience and how long you've been in the staffing industry. I'd also love to hear about what vertical that you're in. So what area of expertise do you have? And so if you don't mind typing into chat, do you have under 1 year? Do you have 1 to 3 years? Do you have 3 to 10 years? Do you have 10 plus years? As well, what is your area? So do you focus on temporary? Are you temp contract? Are you direct hire perm? Or are you potentially a hybrid? And to add to that, I'd also love to know, are you a recruiter? So do you focus purely on that 180 recruitment side? Do you do strictly business development? Do you do a 360 role, or are you in account management position? So if you don't mind typing that into chat, let's see what we have coming up here. So I've got 10 plus years. I've done temp contract perm, recruiter account manager, 3 to 10 years. Recruitment administrator, mixed recruitment business management, 4 years, industrial temp. Okay, so I'm seeing a bit of a mixture there. Let's wait for a couple others. 1 to 3 years. Recruiter, 10 plus perm, account manager, 3 to 10. Okay, so a good level of experiences here. Hybrid, recruit admin. Okay, awesome. Good to see all of that. And that's a great chance for you to know where the chat function is in Zoom, and we're going to use that often. Just to read off the ACSESS Code of Ethics, something that's always good to understand, what our mission is and what we do in the industry here. But as members of the Association of Canadian Search and Employment and Staffing, we commit to uphold this code of ethics and standards and to display it prominently in our place of business. We support the principles set forth and acknowledge that compliance with these principles is in the best interest of ACSESS member companies, their clients, the employees, client organizations, and the reputation of the search, employment, and staffing services profession. So essentially, really being an ambassador for the industry. And that's a lot of what's really important with ACSESS, is really understanding how do we really uphold the expectations and the standards for ourselves, for the organizations that we work for, but for the industry as a whole. And taking a look overall at what our mission statement is really to promote the interest and growth of the Canadian recruitment and staffing industry. And in order to do this, we're going to identify, communicate, and monitor industry standards in business, positively influence and really protect that regulatory and business environment that impacts our members, promotes credibility and visibility of the industry in the community, provide our members with strategic support services, programs, and tools to assist them in achieving their goals and objectives. And so let's talk about why we're here today for this topic, which is on the recruitment and selection module. A particular module that I love at my company, I'm the Director of Learning and Development. And so always training our team on how to really get out there, find the best people, really to up our level of service for our clients, and also to really learn how do we really treat our candidates as customers at the same time. So really looking at both perspectives on what really matters and what we're here to do, right? We're here to bring our clients good service and to bring them great candidates. We're here to bring candidates a really great opportunity for them. And how do we blend that together? So it's certainly a topic that I'm very passionate about. But when we get into this particular module and we're talking about, well, what is recruitment and how is that separate from selection? So I'd like for you to type into chat on how would you define recruitment versus the definition on selection. So if you think of what's recruitment versus selection, I'd like to hear your immediate reaction to that. We'll just give it a minute for some messages to come through. So what's the difference of recruiting versus selection? So what is the difference between recruitment and selection? So Jody said recruitment is the process and selection is the end result. So somebody put into chat that they could not hear me. Can you give me everyone let me know in chat if you can hear me with a simple yes or no? Okay, so yes, yes. Okay, so Nita, you might just need to up the volume potentially on yours there. So I often have here, what else? Recruitment, receiving applications and pre-screening, selection, the final result, the person that you place. Okay, so it says yes, but it keeps freezing. Not sure what's happening there, but maybe what I will do is I'm just going to stop my video and see if maybe that helps. If that keeps happening, please throw me a note into chat. So the recruitment and selection. So let's take a look at some of the definitions. Recruitment is the process of choosing the right person for the right position and the right time. Recruitment also refers to the process of attracting, selecting, and appointing potential candidates to meet the organization's requirements. Whereas selection, it's the purpose of selection is to find the best candidate for the job. So it's the individual who possesses the required KSAOs and personality who will perform well, embrace the corporate mission and values, and fit the organization's culture. So another thing that I'd love to ask you to throw into chat is, do you know the definition of the KSAO? What is the KSAO? Knowledge, skills, abilities. Okay, so you basically got that. So knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. Okay, excellent. So that is exactly it. It's the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. And these are the types of things that we're really looking to identify when we're doing our recruitment. So who are we looking for? And then that selection part, what makes them stand out? So the end result isn't necessarily that placement when it comes to the selection. It's the first, we're trying to find the people that we're looking for and go through all of our processes on how we source them. But then the selection is of that, who are the ones that really have the requirements of what the clients are asking for us? Who has that knowledge? Who has the skills? Who brings those abilities or also capabilities, and then other characteristics that might be defined? And really understanding that is what's going to help us identify who we're bringing forward to our clients. But there's some influencing factors that we want to be keeping in mind. And really, before we jump into that recruitment process, and for many of you, this process will be a refresher. Certainly, if you've been in the industry for a while, some of you, there might be some new concepts that we'll learn. Certainly, I'll be injecting a little bit of my own best practices into this and some of the things I might train our own team on at the same time. So I'm hoping that you'll get, a couple little golden extra nuggets, either refreshers or new concepts. But one of the things that we really want to be thinking about is there are influencing factors typically by the client that will affect the hiring process. So I'd love to hear from you again in chat. We're going to be there a lot today on what could be some of the influences by the client that can have an impact on the hiring process, just to see if anything obviously comes to mind. What could be some key influences that impact the process? Okay, someone says scheduling, location. Culture and environment. Yeah, definitely. Budget, timeline, for sure. Money, timeline. Market conditions. Yep. And that's always, there's an ebb and flow there that we're always trying to navigate and pivot wherever we have to. Okay. Good. So I got some great examples there. So let's take a look at what some are. So money, someone said budget. So money is always a factor when it comes down to that. What is the money? What is the budget for the client? From fees, from compensation offered, right? All of those can have that obvious impact. What's their relationship like with recruiters? Maybe some companies have had very, very positive experiences with recruiters. Maybe some companies have multiple vendors that they're working with. Maybe some companies have only ever worked with one recruiting, depending on the size and scope of the company. Some have really positive, and some have maybe had not so great experiences that could impact the process, and where we need to really sell ourselves and bring out that ability to be that true ambassador for the industry. Maybe it's the level of position that they're trying to fill, or the degree of complexity. Are they looking for that purple squirrel? Are they looking for that needle in a haystack? Is it in a location that's attractive? Someone said location. That could have a real impact. Current market conditions. So that's an obvious for sure. That really impacts the demand. Right? As we know that our market, and especially in the last few years, have shifted back and forth, candidate driven, not candidate driven. As we know, we're in this war on talent, candidate driven market, with also some potential changes again coming forward in the market conditions. So that will really have that impact on the demand. State of their internal business, right? What's going on internally there? Are they thriving? Are they just surviving? Are they going in the opposite direction? What are their overall company policies? Do they promote from within? Do they have to go on those avenues first? Do they need to use internal recruiters first before they go external? What are the legislations? So pay equity, dealing with diversity and inclusion, right? What are those legislations? And then time constraints. Maybe it's that time to fulfill something. How quickly do they need somebody? Do they need them like yesterday? But then it's that hurry up and wait scenario that a lot of us have experienced. What is that contract timelines? Maybe there's certain fulfillments that are required. So really having an understanding that when there's so many influences, there's only certain things that we really have the ability to control and really make that impact on the recruitment. And a lot of that comes down to the people that we find and understanding the process that we can deliver for them, and recognizing how can we deliver that service? How do we really get to understand what are the most important objectives for the hiring process for our clients? And obviously in reality, it's going to depend on each situation, right? Everything is going to depend on each unique situation, but it's important recognizing that there are so many factors. And the important objective in recruitment, like I said, there's two key ones, and we'll go through some of those. But if you're a recruiter or you're a search consultant, then obviously you're well aware of the fact that there are multiple objectives in the recruitment process from beginning to end. And not all recruitment objectives are going to be created equal. And just like everything else, some are more important than others when it comes to understanding what's important for yourself, for the client, from the candidate's perspective. And so it makes sense that the ones that are most important are the ones that could lead most directly to success. And in that case, let's say we're thinking about an internal recruiter or we're thinking about our HR. For them, the success is usually represented by hiring the best candidate for the position. For somebody externally, like I believe all of us are, it's the success is represented by the successful placement of the best candidate for the position that the client engaged us in. So we're there to obviously help the HR professionals and their teams to help them do the best possible job that they can truly do, to bring the best candidates forward to the hiring managers and to make those placements. And then of course, for us to really figure out what is that balanced approach on how we really find people for our clients to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're bringing them the most important. But what I wanted to ask you guys, if you were to think about in terms of objectives of recruitment, and if you were to think about two really important objectives of our role in the recruitment realm of the hiring process, what could that be? Right? What could that be when it comes to the top objectives that we want to have in mind in the recruitment process for our clients? How to attract candidates. Okay, how do we attract them, right? How do we get them excited? How do we get the right information from our clients? A proper intake, so then we can get out there to the marketplace, know who we have to find. How do we sell that opportunity to the candidate? How do we build enthusiasm with that candidate so they'll give us a resounding yes that they're interested? Okay, excellent. What else is an objective of ours? So for sure, attracting candidates is a big one. What else? Source a candidate pool so that they don't have access to. Okay, right. So that's the big value that we really provide the companies, because anybody could have a large database filled with candidates. Anybody could post a job on LinkedIn and get the same candidates applying. Anybody can go into LinkedIn email and just send a whole bunch of messages. And the companies don't need us to necessarily do that. To some degree, yes, because the volume and the time that it takes. But what they really come to us for is that hidden talent market. Just like we come to candidates to present them opportunities that may or may not be hidden on the job market, and that's the value we provide our candidates. The value that we provide the client is bringing them the hidden talent market. The ones that they don't already have access to, the ones that aren't applying to every other job, because that doesn't give that value. So those are great. So how to attract them, how to source candidates that they don't have access to, how do we market the role, and then like a really comprehensive job description, job intake. Okay, so those are really good intakes. So we're going to talk about some of those key things. So the balanced candidate evaluation is obviously going to be also some key objectives that we're wanting to really understand. When we're figuring out who are the right individuals for our clients, how do we make sure that we're upholding the standards and doing our recruitment practices in an ethical way? So number one, do they have the ability and the capability to do the job? So not only do they have the skills to do the job, because those are the obvious, but when we go out there and we're really finding candidates, do they have 7 out of 10 in the skills minimum? But what's their capability? So if you've got 3 candidates or 5 candidates and you're only presenting 3, which of those 5 not only have all the skills that are equal, but which ones can actually do the job and do it really well? Which ones have demonstrated their capability to be successful? What makes them stand out? What about their willingness to do a job? That's another separate matter altogether. So it's one thing for them to be excited about the job, but their willingness to really put their best foot forward, their excitement for that opportunity, something that are they willing to leave their current situation or join that at the end of a contract, their ability to make a positive impact with the management, peers, and subordinates. So we're really wanting to take a really balanced approach on who are the individuals and really be thorough in that overall evaluation. Other things that we're looking at. So again, that willingness to join the organization. And this is really where company culture, employer branding really enter that picture. And an organization, any other recruiter or any other recruiter working for an organization never said, is that the employer brand always has to be portrayed in a very positive way. And that's going to be some of the key factors to help us to get a candidate really excited. So that comes down to later on when we'll talk about that job intake. And this is not just during the recruiting and the hiring process. This is an objective of recruitment that is a non-negotiable, no matter how good the job is of itself. If your candidate does not feel compelled to work for the company, it doesn't really matter how good the job is. So that really ties back to their willingness to work in the environment, willingness to do the job, but their willingness to join the organization. So our part is, are we getting a proper intake? Do our clients understand? And I'm sure we can all agree that clients don't always give us the amount of time that we really need for a proper job intake. So it comes down to educating the client, and especially in today's market, where it's harder and harder to find great candidates. They're either on contracts, they're gainfully employed, they're not willing to take the risk, right? There's been this talk of recession, so some are a little bit hesitant to even leave now. Again, war on talent, hard to find the right people. But if we can't spend that time with a client, and if they don't give us that time, we need to really think about, how do I up my game in educating the client on the impact and the reason why we need a little bit more time to really get to know not just about the job, but who they are as a company, so that we can sell that back to the candidate. Otherwise, your efforts are futile if the candidate's not excited about the organization. Other things that we want to be thinking around is, where are we finding our candidates? But who are we in competition with at the same time? And why companies have to work and move faster and faster if they want to compete for the sought after talent that we're in right now. And in order to be really doing that, we also need to remember, and it goes without saying, it's straightforward, that companies, as we're finding candidates, unless you're doing an exclusive type retained contract with them, they're obviously using all of their own sources as well. So we really have to think fast, we have to act fast, and we really need to always ask, who else are they looking at, so that we know what our competition is. So I want you to throw into chat, if you were to think about who is your main competitor, doesn't have to be the name of a firm. But if you really think about, who are all of your competitors in this candidate market, on the war on talent, finding people fast and finding the right people fast, who are you competing with every day? The clients themselves, right? Internal company recruitment. Other employment agencies. Any others? So the clients themselves, which could be hiring managers, networking, right? Specialized contracting companies, drilling, other recruiters, excavation. Okay. Other applicants. Yeah. Right? Other applicants that might be applying directly to their postings. I think that's what Jesse means. Yes. Okay. So when I started in the industry, now I feel like I'm aging myself, but when I started 18 years ago, yes, we had competitors. The other competitors really were internal employees, word of mouth. It was the HR department. And it was really, again, word of mouth and other recruiting agencies. At that time, we weren't fighting against tons of job boards. Like, I think we had Monster, but tons of job boards. We weren't competing with LinkedIn. Actually, LinkedIn didn't even exist when I started. It was not a big deal. We weren't competing with Boolean searching. We weren't competing with all of these other avenues. We actually did not even have something called internal recruiters. It was HR. But now they've gotten smart. right? And they're hiring a lot of us, people from our industry, to go and work internally. So there's so much more competition out there now that we really need to stay ahead of the game. So when we're thinking about it, and I didn't mean other firms, is their own team first and foremost. So the promotions, HR, internal recruiters, transfers. All of a sudden, thanks so much for your help, but we've decided to transfer an employee. Oh, geez, I never even thought to ask them if they had any internal candidates. Former employees that are maybe coming back, maybe former employees that have references, internal job postings, so internal promotion. Again, those employee referrals, right? Give $1,000 if they find somebody and they stay for 3 months. Previous applicants who maybe previously applied. So we're up against so much when it comes down to that. And so if a company hopes to move quickly, they're going to be tapping into all of these other avenues. That doesn't even tie in the other things that I've mentioned, right? LinkedIn and Monster and Indeed and everything else, Boolean, everything that's out there. And so the idea for the client is like, this is easy for them, right? It's simple, in many cases, easy, it's quick, it's cost effective. They're not paying for our fees. There's no necessarily a big need for a huge induction of training, especially if it was a promotion or a transfer. They've already been in the company. It could help, motivate their own employees to work hard. Increase also different kinds of relationships. It might help improve company loyalty. So there's so many reasons why our clients are doing this, right? And it goes without saying, retention and succession planning and all of that important stuff. So when we are working against the clock to find right people, we're always having to be asking our clients these questions and reminding ourselves not just to think that competition are other firms, because that's the obvious. And we should expect that all of our companies are using multiple firms, especially in this market. But some of the downside to this that we want to be keeping in mind is that obviously in the dialogue that we might have with our clients too is, that's awesome, right? That's key. You want to promote people and all of that stuff. But here's some food for thought on the additional aspects of also looking outside. It helps bring in potential new resources, right? Fresh ideas. It might have limited scope because not every vacant position can be filled. It creates a backfill every time. There could be issues between employees. And in fact, I've recently spoken with somebody where that's a huge issue, where somebody got promoted above somebody else. And now that's created a team of individuals that aren't that happy. So there's those issues that tend to arise. So it's just thinking about, again, our client has a lot of their own sources before they've necessarily even come to us to help them. So we want to be thinking around that process. So we understand that recruitment is that identification of how do we find people. So in addition to all of the client sources and all of the other sources that we can come in, help them to find that skilled expertise, to find them those purple squirrels, to find them the hidden market, right? That needle in a haystack. If they're located somewhere uber remote and it's really challenging, we bring in our expertise. But there's obviously initial steps in the process. And in some cases, there is such a thing as going too fast. We do know that there's different steps that we want to take along the way. And in times we got to work quickly. We have a client that calls us on a Friday at 5 because somebody in front reception is not showing up Monday at 8, and we got to motor and do things very quickly. We tap into our candidate pool to make that happen and do everything that we can. But there are things that we want to think about that if we take too quickly steps in certain areas of the process, that's where missteps happen. And that's where things can go wrong, that it's our job, it's our responsibility. And I often say, like, we're recruiters, we're consultants, we're account managers, but we're process managers, right? Like a project manager, we manage the project, but we're in charge of the process. Can't control the client. We can't control the candidate, right? That's sort of a myth. But we control the process as a process manager. And if we go too fast, we end up compromising potential integrity of the entire process by making mistakes or costly oversight. And so we want to be thinking around, how do we do things well? And so we're going to talk about some of the things that are really important in that process to make sure we do things to the best of our ability as fast as we can, but not having missteps. So number one would be that job order intake. Number two, the sourcing and finding of candidates. Number three, interviewing and candidate selection, right? So the recruitment is, how do we find them? Where are they coming from? What are all of the sources? And you create that quote unquote long list. And then the interviewing selection is, now how do we find the top 3 to 5? And then testing and references. So the first step we're going to talk about is that job order intake. The purpose of today's training isn't specifically around job order. That in of itself could be a whole separate session on how to really execute a really strong, solid job order intake. But we're just going to talk about some of the key things on what we want to be keeping in mind during the job order intake. Now, when we think about the job order intake, we're really thinking about, well, what is it at the end of the day? And again, since I do all of our onboarding and training with our company, when I ask somebody new, well, what do you think a job order is? They all respond back saying basically what they're describing is it's the job description that gets posted on our website or the company's website. I'm like, good try. That's not what it is. The job order obviously is, what does the client want? What do they need that goes beyond the job description? And so for us, the job orders, again, a well-qualified job provides us with the opportunities to help fill the role, right? Which goes without saying. And then part of taking it is to make sure that we really understand it so that we can really find candidates who are a good match. And that's where the selection piece comes in. And so the recruitment will come in to identify a whole host of people that kind of hit some of the key criteria, some of the skills, but then it helps us figure out those real capabilities and figure out who is the best fit for the role. We don't want to bring our clients the 4 or 5 out of 10. We want the 7, 8 out of 10 for the candidate, for the clients. Also recognizing that we're not always going to get the 10 out of 10. And if we're always waiting for that 10 out of 10 perfect fit, the clients are going to be waiting for a long time and they're going to move on to another firm. So we need to think about what's the reality and the realistic nature of that. And that will come into our dialogue with the clients and the education of the clients during the job order intake. And so it's really that process. And again, I know there's a lot of you on the call that have been in the industry for a long time. So just really, again, it's really that process of reviewing those qualifications and requirements of that position in the company prior to engaging with recruitment and selection. We can't even start that process until we really understand the role and the intake of that. So what I'd like to ask you guys again in chat is, why should an organization complete a job order call, or even better, an actual meeting? Why should an organization complete a proper job order intake prior to seeking employees? What's the reason for that? What's the value? Okay, so I'm going to ask you the value to your client, why they should give you the time. Accuracy of job search. It helps us sell the company to our candidates to get them excited, right? Or a candidate search, right? Accuracy of job search, candidate search, to ensure we are looking for the right candidate. It will help us find them the best suited candidate. The right fit for the company, so we find the right person the first time, right? I like that, the first time around. Let's get it right the first time around. Right fit for the environment, right? So it's also the environment. It's not, do they have the skills for the job, but the personality, right? Do they fit the environment and the culture? And culture is key. That is so critical. Whether it's a contract, temp, or permanent position, it's important. Okay. So I'm going to go through and show you a couple of points here. In the long run, it saves time. Absolutely, in the long run. We don't have to keep emailing them or calling them for questions. It saves time so that if during the course of the interview process with their candidates, when it's client-candidate interview and the candidate says, hey, that job wasn't anything that you sold it to be, or the client's like, that candidate's nothing that we were asking for. Well, maybe it's because our job intake wasn't thorough enough. So again, it goes back to that true education requirement of always educating the client. And so what is the value? Right. And again, there's things that we want to be talking about. That education is key. And that education part of it. So you, right, the value for us, obviously it's more likely for us to fill it. We can work in a targeted fashion. So we're not just looking anywhere and everywhere and hoping that we find something. It's easier to sell it to the candidate. Again, when candidates today have options, we can predict a better outcome and more likely to make money and make the placement from the client. Well, hopefully they'll see there's a greater confidence that we know what they're looking for. They're going to see better resumes. The candidates are going to be better prepared for the interviews. And then the candidate, right? There's a huge value to the candidate. The more we know about the job, it gives the candidate the confidence that we also know what we're talking about. They'll understand the company better before they go in to meet with them. It's easier for them to say yes to the job that you're bringing to them, and better job in shorter timescales. So there's so much reason for this. And I often hear when I train people that, well, you know, my client only gives me 10 minutes and I don't want to push the envelope and ask for more because I'm afraid that they're going to say no and just go to another firm. But what's the risk in that? So I'd love to find out if there's anybody who is willing to have offline. I've also got a list of everyone's names here. But is there anybody that's willing to come offline and share what's the risk of the client only giving us a very short time for the job order? Just seeing if I've got any hands up. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So maybe type into chat. What's the downside if a client is not willing to give us the appropriate time for a job intake? Can get the wrong candidate just to fill the role. So what can happen if the client's like, you know what, here's the job description, here's the pay, go for it, right? We won't have time to select the best candidate, not enough information to make a great match and able to market the company to the candidate, downsides, rush process, mistakes in documentation, liability, right? There's a huge liability, expectation is not met. They can lose confidence in us that we can't fill their roles. So again, the key is educate, educate, educate. Always talking to the client about the value of that. So just quickly before we move on to the next slide, I'm curious, how much time on average, and I know every client's different, every job order is different. Sometimes you do a job order of a job you've already done 20 times and with the same client, and this is just, you know, little nuances. But on average, how much time do you get with a client to do a proper job intake? Just type in minutes. 10 minutes. Okay, so that's fast. 5 minutes to do a proper job intake. I used to get 30 minutes. So Tracy, you said I used to get, how come, maybe if you can type in, why not anymore? In a previous role. Okay, got it. What are other average timeframes do you get? So if you're truly given only 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then it's obviously you got to like ask the right questions, but get the client 30 minutes if I'm able to sell the benefits. Okay, so that's the key. If you can sell the benefit, if the client says, I'll give you 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and a lot of people on our team at Appland in temp contract, right? But we got to push back. Even if they say 5 minutes, let's get it to 10, 15. And let me explain to you, client, why. As a part of our recruitment and selection process, we want to get it right for you the first time around, which is going to help you get people faster, the right people. We're going to hit the mark, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are critical. Okay. So just wanted to talk about that. So what we need from a job order intake is some obvious. It's really, again, it's reviewing the qualifications of the requirements. But we want to be talking about what will the candidate be expected to do. So what's the job content? The candidate profile, what are they looking to hire and engage? Why do we need to know, right? Or what do we need to know from the client company or the job site? So what's the information? Are they on a bus route? Is there parking? Where are they located? How far are they from the city center? Whatever that looks like, right? Are they in the office? Is it work from home? Is it hybrid, right? Where will they be going and what are the conditions like? What are the pay and rewards? Obviously, that's standard. But also, how quickly do you really need to find someone? And I'm sure many of us have had that experience on the hurry up and wait, right? We need it yesterday. Okay, I'm going to get you somebody in 3 days, and then 3 weeks goes by before you hear back. So really evaluating how do we protect our time at the same token by understanding the real urgency. How about the commitment? How committed is the client to the process? How committed are they to us? So these are just some of the basic things that we know that we need. And everyone has a different job order form and structure, so we're not going to go through that. But there's so many things that we're looking at, other things that really help us in our recruitment and selection. Performance standards, expectations, what are the KPIs and metrics? For every role will be different. What are the policies? Does the company still have COVID protocols or not in place? What are the hours? What's the term length? What's the start date? What are the information about the knowledge, skills, attributes, and other? Where to locate the right people? How do we find the right candidate? What would be the ideal? What wouldn't be the ideal? What organization they offer in income, benefits, culture? How do we stretch the job order, right? If the client says, oh, we need somebody at 55,000. So if I bring you somebody at 65, that is absolutely perfect. Do I bring them to your attention? Yes or no? You say the person needs to have a university degree. Can I bring you somebody with a college diploma? Yes or no? Right. So where can you stretch the order to expand your pool of candidates? Right. Meet the exiting employee and get their perspective. Okay, I love that. Can you meet the exiting employee to get their perspective? That's great. Other things, what should it, why, right? That should say why should a candidate join the company? What is it about your organization? In today's market, client, if we have a candidate who's got multiple offers and there's a demand for them, it's got an IT contractor who's hot in the marketplace and they're in demand, why would they choose your contract or your company over the other ones? Why would a contractor potentially not extend their contract in their current situation to leave that known contract and come to your contract? What are the issues and challenges in the company that we need to be aware of? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly that we need to know? How do we set the search expectations? If we only have a very short minute of time, how do we set that expectation? You could spend just 5 or 10 minutes talking about what they could expect from us. What do we expect from them? How do we put on that process manager hat, make sure that we're in control? Because if we don't have that opportunity to really lay out what we expect of them and what they can come to get from us, right, we're not going to have control over the process. And so if we don't do all of this, the things that can go wrong, obviously, like you said, we'll locate the wrong people. We won't be able to present that role, and they're just going to pick another role that seems more exciting for them. Maybe we misrepresent the role altogether from the candidate, and then the candidate comes to not trust us. We're not going to have lower fill ratios. We might have a high fall off. I don't know about you guys, but fall offs to me was the worst thing. I hated fall offs, right? So we want to try to mitigate those risks. But there's also the reality is that sometimes, even if we educate, and we tell the client why we need that extra time so that we can get the right, sometimes our hands are tied, right? Where it is what it is. And if a lot of us are working on maybe more of an account manager, maybe you're dealing with more enterprise level accounts where they're dealing with a managed service provider, a lot of the things go through the VMS systems, right? If those are some situations, or if you have some clients where it's like, hey, listen, I'm giving you 10 minutes, take it or leave it. And if you can't do it, we're going to move on to somebody else. So you still take it. If that's the case, if you choose to still take it under those conditions, then you need to get creative. So if we're in that, again, we don't live in a perfect world. So if we're in that scenario where we don't have the perfect amount of time to get what we need, there's other sources of information that we want to get creative around. And what can that be? So what could be those things? If you were to think about where else can I get additional information that's going to help me figure out who am I recruiting? What selection criteria am I going to use? How am I going to sell the opportunity to the candidate? How am I going to even profile the candidate? And then how am I going to prepare the candidate for the interview with the client if I only have a 5-10 minute job or intake? So in chat, what could be some of the other creative out of the box things that we can do to get more information to help us in this process? Visit their website, okay? And maybe Natalie, on the website, if you broke that down even further, what specifically would you look for on the website? Glassdoor, right? What are the reviews? Because remember, Glassdoor is great because you're going to look at Glassdoor and so are your candidates. So we kind of want to know, is there a lot of really bad stuff on Glassdoor that we know that we need to make sure that we're ready to discuss that with the candidate if it comes up? Or really great stuff that we could really promote that. Job postings, the ATS, Google the company and hiring manager and LinkedIn, right? So Google the company, are they in the news? Sometimes there's a section in the news called movers and shakers. What do they do? Maybe there's social media. Are they doing posts, right? Things that they're doing in the community. Do they have a good reputation? Or if they're a public company, how are they doing, right? Are they doing well on the stock exchange? So there's lots of other things that we could really be thinking about from that perspective that could help us. Now, also, if you're finding that you don't have a lot of information from their client on even how to find the candidate, like they're literally like, here's the job description, here's the salary, this is what we need them by, and these are the top 3 things we need, and that's all you have. One of the things that we could do is go onto LinkedIn. Check out the employees in that company that have a similar job title. Where did they come from? What was their background? What was their skill? If those people are accessible on LinkedIn. So other things that we can try to do to at least get creative. So there's other things. So you guys have talked about a lot of that. So CRM, right? First, what's in our CRM already? How have we worked with the company? What kind of jobs did we work on with them? How difficult was it to make those placements? Search Google, right? Do a lot of stuff in Google. Find out who they are, what's happening. Glassdoor, candidate intel. Maybe you've interviewed other candidates or somebody on your team has interviewed candidates who once worked for that company. Or maybe you've got a placed candidate already there. It's a good opportunity to do a quality control call and check in with them. LinkedIn, social media, and the job description. So really thinking about how, and sometimes we're just got to do some assumptions, but we have to be careful, right? If you're making a guesstimated assumption, you have to find a way to back it up and be able to check, make sure that you're not making up stuff. You have to keep things factual. You don't want to come up with something that you don't even know if it's true. So thinking about some of those things. So in short, it is important that we make sure that we have all the information we need by the beginning. So by spending a few minutes making sure we have the right information initially, we will save time in the long run. And someone put that in there. In the long run, a little bit of extra work up front is going to save a whole level of headache in the end for us and for the client, and sell them on that benefit. We will also be less likely to miss candidates or fail to get them committed to the job due to lack of information. So, an example, working with candidate, reaching out to a candidate that have said to you, you know what, I already received a call from another recruiting firm about that job. I'm not interested. Okay, well, what was it that you weren't interested in? Well, generally, quite frankly, I didn't have any information. Oh, okay, well, if I was able to give you more information and engage you and get you excited based on all the stuff that I have, would you hear more about it? Well, sure, I might be willing to listen if you truly have more information. So understanding that piece of it is so important. And then these are just some of the basics, like basics to get us even started. Bare minimum, right? What are the titles I want? Are there alternate titles? Is there one rung below? So who could be the next person up? Core industry, are there sub-industries? What companies have they come from? Are there direct competitors? Who are the indirect competitors? What's the compensation spread? Years of experience, right? Does that matter in today's market? One of the things that we might want to focus on with clients is, does it really matter on the years of experience, but more on the capability? So who's to say that the person 5 years into that job is that much better than the person who's 3 years in the job? That's how you stretch the order, right? When they say, well, I need 5 to 7 years. Okay, so if I bring you somebody 3 years who far exceeds our other candidates who are at 5 years, do you want to hear about them? Okay, and all these other things. So basic stuff that we're looking for here. And so then this can help us with that overall selection criteria to help guide our recruitment decisions. And then during that recruitment process, applicants again are assessed onto the extent of which they meet the selection criteria. And so the preferred candidate is obviously then selected according with their overall suitability, the best fit for criteria relative to the other candidates. Any questions on this basic job order stuff? Any questions? Okay, so now we're going to move on to step 2, which is sourcing and finding candidates. And so I guess I'd love to ask on, why do we need to source for new candidates? Obviously, it might come across as too obvious of a question, but why do we need to keep sourcing for new candidates? Like refilling our candidate pool. Why do we need to? And I know it's obvious, but why do we need to keep sourcing for new candidates? Candidates are always moving, to always have a pool, to have the best candidates for our clients. If you're out, oh, I was just going to say the recording to stop. So quick response to customer need. New talent can come in at any time. So as you're thinking about that, let me ask you the next question. What holds recruiters back from continuously sourcing new candidates? What holds us back from sourcing new candidates? Time, no jobs to fill, slow clients. So time, right? No jobs to fill. And in fact, when we don't have jobs to fill, right? If we're sort of in that kind of slump where there isn't a job to fill, that's actually the awesome time to source new candidates because we have time. We're not busy managing a process. So we're proactively, quote unquote, proactively recruiting candidates before we need them and just maintaining that relationship with them so that we can have a pipeline of candidates. We can find out from those candidates where the jobs are, where they're interviewing, where they're applying, right? That can be a good way to turn that around. I used to say if I didn't have jobs to work on, the first thing I did is I really upped my game in sourcing, headhunting and interviewing, lack of recruitment knowledge, slow clients. Okay, so excellent. And so really, for the most part, when I asked that question, you guys answered with some other really good ones. Most simply say is that they truly don't have prioritized sourcing. So what they end up doing is working the best of who they find the fastest, right? It can work, but how about the client who is pickier than you used to, right? What about the client that's really looking for that purple squirrel? And also, what about the promise that we give our clients? At the end of the day, client, we want to bring you the best of who's truly out there for you and not just the best of who applied. So if we're bringing you the best of who's truly out there for you and not just the best of who applied, that's the value, right? When we're thinking about what value, what benefit does the company get by working with us? So we can just kind of keep recycling the great candidates we have, and that's okay. But eventually we're going to get to a point where we need that new talent and we need to build that pipeline. We need our talent matrices ready to go so that we're not just reactively operating. And I'm sure a lot of us can attest to the experience of reactive recruiting, right? You get a job, you're reactive. You get a job, you're reactive. You're scrambling, you're burning the midnight oil, you're working into the evening, starting early, because you're always on a reactive level. That's not a sustainable business model of recruiting. The most sustainable model of recruiting is constantly filling your talent pipeline so that you're ready to respond fast when the client needs come up. So what we want to be thinking around is, some people might say, well, I don't have time to waste on busy making stuff. Well, sourcing is not busy making stuff. That's where the money is. That's the closest to the dollar activities that we want to be focusing on. And at the start of each day, we need to say to ourselves, what do I need to do today to move my desk forward? And at the end of the day, did I do the things that will build my desk and move the business forward? Whether you're in a sales capacity or candidate side or both. What do I need to do today to move my business forward? And if that means I need to have the best candidates ready to go when those jobs do come up, then that's what you got to be doing. And again, what do I need to keep doing to keep that happen? So we want to think around, what can I stop doing in a day that maybe is that's more of the shuffling paper or the busy making, and really getting to the core of building my model of business, my business model. And so what about the sources of candidates, right? There's so many areas that we can go, but building and maintaining a candidate database that evolves and becomes self-sustaining is the sum of the recruiter's worth. So a strong, positive, and trusting relationship with your candidates will result in referrals and other marketable candidates. So number one, I've always felt, and I've always operated this way and trained, is that your number one source of candidates is obviously those referrals, reaching out to the candidates who are great at what they do, whether they're looking or not looking, placed candidates, always having that communication. But there's so many other avenues that we could be finding people. So I'd love for you to throw into chat, what would be all of the avenues that we can really, in addition to the referrals that we want to get of really highly marketable candidates, referrals is our best source of candidates. But where else are we, other than our ATM and other than LinkedIn? I'm not going to let you guys say LinkedIn because every other recruiter goes to LinkedIn. So outside of your ATS, and outside of LinkedIn, where else are we finding candidates? Resume searches, Indeed. Referrals, yep. Number one. Advertisements, radio. Okay, love that. Facebook, okay, existing candidates in database, who have they worked with, that is great, right? So reaching out to existing candidates, who have they worked with, right? What makes that person great, so you can headhunt them. I have one radio advertisement that runs 5 days a week. Very cool. Kijiji. Okay, yes, right. And a lot of people don't realize that, but Kijiji is a great, depending on the type of candidate you're looking for and the level and what that all looks like, but Kijiji is quite common. So there are so many avenues. Go and see or call employment agencies, government run. So write all these down, right? So Facebook, Instagram, depending on the nature of the role. Facebook, you can do a little shout out on Facebook, but if you haven't already researched how to source candidates from Facebook, you should. Twitter, there's an advanced search function in Twitter that allows you to find candidates, even if you're not a big Twitter user. There's free Boolean sites like Recruitment. There's Boolean search. There's going on companies' websites, meet the team. There are universities. I've reached out to professors in the past. I've reached out to instructors at universities on a specific department. So many things that you guys could really be looking at. Zoom info, GitHub, it goes on and on and on. And asking everybody and anybody, met a great server at a restaurant, suggest a CSR or a sales role. Absolutely. Actually, I kind of did that the other week at Joey's. I said to her, so are you looking for a new job? She's like, I'm studying to be a psychologist. All right, then. So always thinking about where can you find people. And I'll often say to our recruiters, you can't say that that candidate's not out there if you stopped at LinkedIn. You got to keep going and keep going. It's everywhere and anywhere. So we want to be thinking about that, also that selection criteria when we're finding where do we find people, but then that selection criteria to measure against and accurately source the right candidates. And we do that through the selection criteria. Again, as we mentioned earlier in the definition, it's intended to identify those job seekers who meet the minimum required qualifications in order to be considered an applicant. Sourcing a bunch of names, they're not an applicant yet. They're potential prospects. But until you've identified that they meet the minimum criteria, can they truly be considered a candidate or an applicant? So they're preferred, desired, any additional criteria that gets developed. Then it can help you make the ultimate decision. So if you could type in chat, what selection criteria do you use when looking for candidates? What selection criteria do you use when looking for candidates? Mode of transportation, skills and qualifications, education, experience, or mix of both. What other criteria? Previous work experience. Okay, transferable skills. Okay, is the candidate only taking the job to add to their resume, right? Is this a job for them? What's the reason for it? And maybe it's a temporal and it helps them just kind of fill the gap, fill the void. Maybe it is to add to their resume, but why, right? And the value to that. So some companies will use a way to really make sure that the selection criteria is developed as a way, again, to guide that recruitment decision. And then during the recruitment process, they're assessed against different selection criteria that you've identified or you've identified in connection and collaboration with the client on what is that specific. So the must-haves, right? Some of us use that terminology. What are the 3 to 5 must-haves? What are the 3 to 5 nice-to-haves? And how am I going to measure that? And how am I going to do it so that I'm using an assessment and a grid to help systematically compare candidates' resumes? And a lot of our clients, especially within the HR departments or hiring managers, when they're going through the interview process and that selection, they're using a tool, right? Some kind of grid, they're using some kind of matrix. So why not us at the same time to help us, especially with the volume of people that we might have to screen in order to get to the right person. And in fact, I'm sure a lot of you have the same experience where there's a lot of fake resumes out there, a lot of fraudulent resumes, a lot of fake candidates. So how do we really narrow that down? And we recently had a job posted for a software developer. It was a contract role, and we received 140 resumes, of which 100 of them were fake. And so how do we get on and really assess who those great candidates are and who are the legitimate candidates from that? And we can use a matrix. We can use some sort of guide. If you were offered the role and receive a counteroffer from your current employer, how likely are you to take it, right? Excellent question. Really finding out their commitment to the process and what are their motivators? What are their wounds? Are they actually really looking? And so this is just an example of what we can do. At the end of the day, you might start with your big list of 40 candidates. Out of the 140, 40 were real candidates. You do your elimination process based on the resume scan. Maybe at that point, you narrowed it down to 15. You're actually going to screen and have a call or an interview with. From there, maybe you got it down to 5. The client has clearly said, I only want 3. and this is what you get to. And again, that's not always going to be the case, right? Sometimes we're literally having to respond within hours. Otherwise, we've lost out on the deal. But that's just an example of that. And to help you figure out, okay, well, who is the best one? Which one actually gets put forward? How would I rank them on a scale of 1 to 3, maybe 3 being the highest, maybe 1 being the lowest? And then what does that matrix look like? So just as an example of what your clients are often using in their HR departments is some kind of grid system, something that we could also look at adopting as well. Other things that we want to talk about is what are some of the mistakes that we often make? And there is a trove of those tools that we've looked at. There's all those online resources at our disposal. And we might think that sourcing candidates for a particular position is easier today than it was in prior decades. Actually, it's to a veteran recruiter like myself, it's making that task even more daunting and more competitive and less personal. And one of the things I try to train people, I say, we got to go old school in today's market. Doesn't mean we shouldn't use Recruiter LinkedIn. Doesn't mean we should do all the sourcing and all the bullying and all those things we need. But sometimes we have to go a little bit old school, which is trying our very best in our power to get someone live on the phone or doing whatever we can because we have all this stuff at our disposal. And when I hear about the struggles that my colleagues have today compared to when I was running a very busy desk, very different. The more tools and resources that are out there, the less we're competing with so much more to get the candidates fastest to our clients so that we get them the right people. And so at the end of the day, there really is no single best method of sourcing, but there are some common mistakes that we want to be thinking about. So one of them could be making assumptions about candidates that we've never met. So too often recruiters will, maybe write to a potential candidate, use a standard blurb that we've cut and pasted into other emails that might sound something like, I've got the most amazing job for you that I know you're going to love. Well, we don't know what that candidate's going to love. That's just an assumption on our part. So what would be wrong in that and the mistake in that is that when we're approaching a candidate with this attitude, we're assuming that something about that person that we don't even know about yet. Right? I have a great job that's perfect for your background, but we don't really know that. How do we know it's perfect for the background? We don't know what they're looking for. We're making an assumption. The truth is we really have no idea. So you could risk losing the trust in the candidate by taking that approach. Other things to think about is, I know it's kind of small on the screen here, but you guys should have it printed out, but is discounting active job seekers. And times have changed a little bit now. Although during the pandemic, obviously there were more people that were active. Now there's been this whole influx of trying to find people, which has been really hard. But back in the day when I was trained, which I don't think was an accurate necessarily way, but we were trained to only believe that a passive candidate, so a candidate who's not looking for jobs, was the most desirable. Yes, finding a passive job seeker who's not applying to every job, they're desirable in that perspective that they're making change for the right reasons. They're not applying to everything and anything. They're not doing it just to add to their resume. So there's so many reasons for that. But if we are discounting active job seekers based on that old mentality, then we're going to discount some really great people. And maybe it depends on the role, but we don't want to discount individuals who may actively be on the job market for legitimate reasons. But that's kind of an old myth that if they're actively on the market, they're not as desirable. And if we do that, we're going to miss out on a pool of potentially really solid candidates. Writing general job ads that don't weed out the weak matches as well. So if our job postings are too general or too generic, or worse, if we're putting up dummy ads for a job that doesn't actually exist, we're having a harder time to actually weed out the right matches. So again, that example where we got 140 applicants and 100 of them weren't even real. So it really takes these days a millisecond for someone to apply to a job. And for this reason, that's why we might get like thousands of resumes when we're placing ads online. But what's wrong when we don't try to get a little bit more granular in that job posting is that it can be too time consuming for us to go through hundreds of resumes. And so if we put a few things in the ad to knock out those who are just really sending their resume without the real consideration if they're qualified, and they'll still do that, but let's try to get a little bit more specific on those job postings, right? In that perspective. Another thing is turning a blind eye to candidates who don't fit at least that 7 out of 10. And that's what I was saying about before. If we are always looking like, number one, if we're discounting active job seekers, but if we're only finding candidates or looking for candidates who are going to fit that criteria 10 out of 10. And if we turn a blind eye to the candidates who don't fit the criteria to a T, then we're going to have a lot of great candidates that our competitors are going to scoop up and present those to our client. And a lot of recruiters are set on candidates having that specific skill set to the letter, experience to the letter. And again, we're running the risk. And if we become too rigid on the skills, and by the way, that also comes back to the education with your client at the job intake, again, is we're going to do everything in our power to get you that 10 out of 10. But the reality, and in today's market, we're going to be really excited if we get you that person who's 7.5 out of 10, even 7 out of 10, we're doing really great. And we're going to share with you when we bring them forward to you on what might be lacking. And so you're telling them up front that 10 out of 10 may not exist. And we might just do the client a disservice if we falsely state that. So really thinking around, how do we make sure that that we're not just waiting on luck for the jackpot for that perfect person to surface, but we're super excited if we get somebody pretty close. Another thing is placing all of your faith in that well-written ad at the same time. So on one hand, you don't want to have a general job ad that's too generic that you're going to get hundreds of resumes and waste a ton of your time. But if we also just sit back and wait for that really well-written job ad, we all know that we can't just sit back these days and wait for that perfect candidate to apply to us, because guess what? If they're applying to your job posting, they're probably applying to the same job posting that your client has also just placed. And your client doesn't need to pay you for that person in that case. When the client turns around and says, hey, I've already got John Smith's resume, but thank you very much, you're like, oh, right? So we can't just sit back and wait. We have to get out there and be as proactive as we possibly can, and really doing that. And then one of the last things that's also a mistake that recruiters make in sourcing is saying, I have no time to source. And we already talked about that. If you're on the recruiting desk, if you're in a 360 role, you have to make the time. It's just like business development. And I've heard a lot of recruiters say, I don't have time to do BD. But what do you mean? What happens if all of your jobs disappear tomorrow? And then now you're scrambling and you're reactive. That's not a sustainable model of recruiting. You have to make the time. It's like 30 minutes a day will keep the doctor away. I often say 30 minutes a day keeps the bill keeper away, or the bill seeker, or whatever, the collection person away. So we need to build it in, flex those sourcing muscles, flex those headhunting muscles and those business development muscles every single day. So of the sourcing mistakes that recruiters make, of these 6, which one resonates the most with you? If you're to look at one and go, oh yeah, I could resonate with that. And that's why just type in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and no judgment. It's just everyone has all of these. We've all experienced this. So I'm just curious, just so that I'm more for me to understand, which one would you resonate with the most when it comes to sourcing? I have no time. Yep. Number 4, okay, turning a blind eye. Yeah, that's a big one for a lot of people. Are like, oh yeah, right? We're always thinking that we need the 9 out of 10. 6, I have no time. Any others? Okay, so we got some 4, 6, making assumptions. Yep. So we might assume, well, another assumption is they're the perfect fit. But another assumption that we sometimes make is, oh, I see that they've been at their company for 6 months. There's no way that they're going to be looking for change, or they just joined there 3 months ago. How can we make that assumption? The honeymoon phase is over, right? After 3 months, that honeymoon phase is over. Maybe they're at that point where they're like, oh, what did I get myself into? Right? So if we judge too quick, exactly, then we're going to miss out on candidates, either because they've been somewhere for what we say is too long or too short, or we assume they're perfect, or we assume that they're not perfect, right? At the end of the day, it's speak to whoever you need to speak to. Okay. And then again, not having a sourcing strategy in place is the last one that I wanted to point out. I forgot that I had that 7th one there. And that goes without saying. Sometimes it's just taking kind of like that, I'm going to get up today, I'm going to figure out what I have to do today, and I don't have a plan, right? I don't have a structure, I don't have a plan, I don't have a strategy. I'm just going to kind of do everything and anything without an action plan in place. And that can make life complicated, right? Where you're just spinning wheels, you feel busy because you're constantly trying to accomplish something, but you're not moving things forward because other things that we're looking at. So let's take a look at a couple of things. And then we're going to finish off this section on sourcing, and then we'll take a 10-minute break before we go to the last 2 sections. So factors to consider before you source. Some of the things, it can't be said enough that, ignorance to certain things around, discrimination and all these things are really, really, really important. So first of all, legal requirements. Does anybody know, if you can type in chat, what does the BFOR stand for? What is BFOR? Anyone know? Okay. Oh, here I got one come up. Bonafide occupational requirement. Perfect. Thank you, Tyler. So the legal requirements, Employment Standards Act, and we're not going through that today, but understanding that. What are the human rights codes? Employment equity and proportional representation, client urgency, importance of position to fill, role complexity, nature of the work, making sure we're bringing the right people in. Right, the client's in-house recruitment expertise, what do they already have? Availability of the candidate pool, the supply and demand. So there's so many considerations that we're keeping in mind at the same time. And in one of your other topics, I think on business ethics, you'll talk about those BFORs, about the human rights codes and equity, making certain that we're always doing the right thing, playing fair in the sandbox. It goes without saying, as I said, that we really have to make certain that we're abiding by these things so that we uphold our standard in the industry and be that ambassador to your brand and to the brand of the industry. Thinking about a couple of other things, we talked about this, so I'm going to give you a little bit more around all of the different things that we can be considering. So again, online sources. And now that we've, established, right, at this point, you've established what the job entails, you've established the job profile, how you might validate it with a selection criteria, knowing what good looks like, the ABC or the 1, 2, 3, and how you might measure that, understanding what's an A candidate, a B candidate, a C candidate. Then there's all of these different methods that we're looking at. So as we talked about, remember, the clients have all of their sources. The internal promotions, internal transfers, former employees, their internal job postings, their employee referrals, who were some of those previous applicants. But then there's all of those other external sources that we also talked about. That's not on here. So our other competitors, right? Direct recruiters, employment exchanges, employment agencies, advertisements, professional associations, there's campus recruitment, there's word of mouth, that these are the other things our client is using. So all of their internal stuff, and then all of those external. And then when we're faced with a vacancy, our hiring managers and our HR specialists, or when they're faced with a vacancy, they're considering all these sources. And so where we come in is by going through and bringing all of this to that as well, not to help them supplement what they're doing. If we have exclusivity, even better. But LinkedIn Talent Insight, Twitter, right? Search followers, like, post, share, connect, Facebook, Instagram. There's all of those Boolean stuff we've talked about, staff directories, trade show directories, association websites, areas that you could put a job ad, and maybe not just on your website, not just on LinkedIn, but someone said Kijiji, right? You could do a job shout out on Kijiji. You could post an ad on Twitter, a little shout out. LinkedIn, whether it's in your own page or an actual paid one, posting an ad to association, posting ads with universities and career centers, posting an ad on niche job boards, industry websites. Some of those you have to pay for. So obviously it depends on budget, but there's so many places that we can really be thinking around getting creative and going above and beyond of what our clients are already doing. But as I talked about before, the number one best way of finding a candidate is through recruiting, through referrals. And that can come as well from so many different areas. Professors at universities and colleges. Again, I reached out to a professor. Well, it was can't remember if it was a professor or an instructor. I was looking for a graphic design person. I spoke to him on the phone, explained who I was, why I was calling, how I could help his graduating students or his graduates, sent in the job description, and he had sent me like 30 resumes, and I placed the candidate, and I went to place other candidates. Someone said employment career center relationships, right? All of these different things, past placements or referrals, past candidates, great clients that you have a good relationship with. I remember having a client who said, hey, I know so many people in the electrical wiring industry. If you need me to point you in any direction, why don't we do that? Okay, when you're interviewing the candidates, who do you know? Once kept company flyers in gym centers. Okay, cool. I remember at a resume service, I had my business card at one of our most popular resume services in Winnipeg, reaching out to those resume people and get really good at referring your candidates to the same resume person. And then they'll start referring candidates back to you, right? That's real. There's so many things we need to do to get creative and think outside the box. So we're going to pause here. We will carry on from where we left off. We're going to talk. Hopefully everyone has come back. Maybe just shoot me a quick message in chat if you are back. That just say here, and I'll know how many people have joined us back. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, perfect. So let's hop back into things. So the last slide that I wanted to talk about in regard to candidate sourcing, and we're really not going to spend a lot of time around this one, as it's a whole other topic in of itself, but very much part of that sourcing perspective. So if we go back to the slide where we talked about getting referrals, again, whether you're sourcing online and you're finding some great candidate names during the course of your candidate interviews, you're getting some names of people for you to directly headhunt. One of the things we want to be thinking about is that trust is also earned in order for you to get some names from individuals to go out there and headhunt candidates. So it's often based on that honesty, your consistency, the integrity, the professionalism that you're conveying. And once you've really been able to establish that and build rapport and that trust, you're in a position to ask candidates or other industry contacts on questions like, you know, who do you know who is also looking to make a change? Who do you report to, right? Maybe you get the name of their manager, which helps for both headhunting and BD. Who's outstanding in your field? Why did you select that person? How do you fit into the company in terms of a family tree or the org chart? Where have you been interviewing? That's more of a business development understanding. You know, many companies like to see 3 peers, maybe 2 to 3 peers that could speak to your skills. Who would you choose? Why would you choose them? Who was the last team lead on the project you were working with? Who are some other great contractors that you worked with? Have you worked with other temps? Do you know of them and how to reach them? Who was your last supervisor? So again, it's just asking some of those questions. And in the course of a proper phone screen or a proper candidate interview, we should be able to walk away with at least 3 other names of people that we can then turn into a headhunt call by asking referrals. Who do you know that may or may not be looking, that you have a high regard for? What do you like about that person? Again, who did you work closest with? Who would be a peer reference for you? And by asking those and feeling confident in earning the right to ask those will then give you a really good grounding to start think about passive candidate sourcing. So those true headhunt candidates. And with a phone and good search tools, you can find 3 to 4 people for any assignment, potentially within 2 days of really figuring out, how do I find them? Where are they hiding? Who are they? This is going to ultimately be that idea of building a proactive pool of candidates, that sustainable model of recruiting, where you're proactively adding them, whether you have a job for them today or not. It all goes into the dialogue that you'll have with them on why you're reaching out. And we don't have to just headhunt people when we have a job. In fact, it's the opposite. We should headhunt people because they have a great skill set or they came highly recommended. And we talk to them about, we're proactively having this conversation with you for the future, should an opportunity arise that aligns with your skill set and what you would be looking for. So we could respond quickly to a client need and call you first. Again, the concept of headhunting does not need to be for an active job. It could be for the future. It's all on how you position it. And some of the things that we want to be thinking around is, how do we track it, right? Maybe starting today. Do you do headhunts every day? How many? How about the percentage of calls that actually get returned? What kind of voicemail are you leaving them? Right? Are you giving too much information, not enough information for them to call back? How many people that you've spoken to are actually open to considering your opportunity or staying in contact for future opportunities? How many of good referrals do you get per call? And when you track some of those things, then you'll start understanding, well, maybe this idea of cold call candidate calling or reaching out to them, and you might just have to call them directly at their place of work and get through the gatekeeper. And there's a whole other process around that. And yes, you may have to reach out to them on LinkedIn email if there's absolutely no other choice, right? Especially with the Canadian anti-spam legislation and not emailing people without permission, we do have to get a little bit creative. So I just like to know in chat, and some companies, headhunting just isn't a part of the everyday practice, and some it absolutely is. I know when I was running a full-time recruiting desk, I'd probably say 95% of my placements over those 14 years on a full desk was strictly headhunting. I probably placed 5% of people who directly applied. So I'm curious, how many people headhunt with a simple yes or no, the cold headhunt to a candidate? They're not expecting your call. They don't know who you are. And you contact them completely out of the blue and have a conversation with them. And you may call them at their place of work. So I'm seeing 1 yes, no. I have when I was working a desk. Okay, rarely. Any others? Yes. Okay. Okay. So I'm seeing sort of a mixed in replies there. So again, it's just one other avenue, and I would be remiss if I didn't at least bring that up in the concept of recruitment and selection. So now we know what recruitment is. We know there's steps in the recruitment process. We know there's a plethora of places to find candidates. We know we need a really solid, robust job intake in order to properly find candidates, know where to find them in the first place, know how to screen them, know how to interview them, know how to basically justify why we should be on the phone with that person or having an interview with them based on a really good job for that person, good opportunity. So what happens? Obviously, we want to be thinking around that screening process. So in that, and I understand in some desks, like if it's a temp desk, if it's a contract desk, that screening call, that first point of contact, that initial screen could also end up being the interview, could be a 2-in-1. On a perm desk, you might have a screening call first, for the first 10 minutes and then schedule an extra 30, 40 minutes with them at a different time, within a couple of days, depending on the scenario. So that could be this 2-in-1 screening / interview, or they could be 2 separate events. And good recruiters are going to qualify the candidates they meet in advance of presenting jobs to them. Ideally, one of the best practices that I've always tried to adhere by is, before I just pitch a job out of the gate, is I really want to make sure, I want to hold my cards tight and understand, are the candidates I'm willing to share the opportunity with, do they have the skills and the capabilities to do the job? And do they have the right motivation? Are they just kicking tires? Are they just wasting time? Are they just using this opportunity to get a counter offer somewhere else? And this, when we really understand that element, and if all of those check marks are checked, they've got the skills, check, capabilities, check, right motivations, check, then I'm in a comfortable position to present the opportunity. And that might be just a 10-minute quick screen, might be a 30-minute call. But if we start pitching jobs straight out of the gate, like literally, if the first 5 seconds that they hear is, "Hi, my name is Jill Cantor, I'm a recruiter with Applin. The reason why I'm calling you today is I've got a great software developer role, with Microsoft. I'd love to chat with you about it." You've lost control of the process. And it's very easy from there for things to go wrong. And yes, sometimes we need to cut to the chase and get candidates quickly, but if we take an extra 10 minutes to really qualify them, then it helps us understand, are we on the right track with this person? And imagine if you're looking to buy a nice secondhand car, right? Would you just look on the internet and then plan to test drive it? Or would you ask questions, right? Would you want to know what's the age of the car? What's the mileage? What's the condition? How many owners did it have? Is there an accident history? And anyone who doesn't pre-screen when buying a car runs into the risk of wasting their time and money, right? If you just showed up to someone's house and drove off with it. The same goes with looking for great candidates. So that pre-screening is really important. And unless we enjoy working day in and day out to hit our targets, we'll need to work efficiently. And how? One of the best ways is screening candidates that are actively seeking a new job prior to committing to an in-person interview as well, or a video interview, or however you're set up today. And when you take that 10 minutes to screen them, to first identify, is this even somebody that I want to spend another 30, 40 minutes with? That's a great step in that process. But if you're on the type of desk where you screen / interview at the same time, and then you basically present the job and then get them to the client as quickly as possible, then we need to really understand how robust of that process is it. And we can use that by asking ourselves 3 really key objectives. Number 1, is this candidate a star, right? Or at least that's 7.5 out of 10. Am I going to waste my time presenting an opportunity to this candidate, walking them down the path with a client for it to go nowhere? Sometimes we don't know that. Will I waste my time interviewing this candidate in another step, like taking it further, right? Do they have the criteria that we need? Do they have the motivation? Are they kicking tires or not? Also, what opportunities do I have right now that could be a fit for this person? And if not right now, what would I have for them in the future? Again, that example, receiving 140 resumes, only 40 of them were real candidates. Imagine if we called all 140 of those people and screened them all. We're wasting a lot of time. So getting down to the core of who do I spend my time with and really protecting your time. And one of the things that we want to be thinking around is, again, right, how much time do we have? So do I take 5 minutes for initial screen? Do I take 15 minutes? Depending on the skill experience level, depending on how quickly you need to move through the process. And then some of the things that we want to be thinking around is, well, why do we do that screening to begin with? And I've been asked this question many times, and it's obvious, but a lot of people will say, well, I don't understand why I have to screen a candidate for 10 to 15 minutes when I could just send them an invite and have an interview with them. But why, right? Time is precious. If you send them if you receive a resume or you find them in your applicant tracking system, or your CRM, and you like what you see, but you've never spoken with them, and you send them an email saying, can we schedule 30 minutes to have an interview? I'd love to chat with you. Or you receive a resume directly to, and you say, great, let's schedule a 30-minute meeting. And 10 minutes into that meeting, you realize, oh, this is really not somebody I'm going to be able to place, you don't want to be rude, right? And cut out of that call in 10 minutes, right? That wouldn't be fair to that person. It wouldn't be an ambassador to your brand by doing that. You want to leave everybody feeling positive and having a good encounter with you. But if you do that screen for those 10 minutes and you say it's a 10-minute screen, then you have that. And so again, it helps to reduce the candidate pool to a manageable number. You could ask yourself those questions. Like I said, are they a star? Will I waste my time taking this further? Are there other opportunities? Can they meet other criteria on a current role or future roles? So really wanting to ask ourselves, if I just take those 10 minutes for those candidates, it could help me mitigate the risk of spending time on the wrong people and get right down to the people that I should be dealing with. So what I'd love to ask you is, what is your current process when you're receiving resumes? And just so I know for a baseline in my conversation, to tailor my conversation, are you actively screening, like that 10-minute screen, and then booking an interview? Or is it usually that 2-in-1? I do a screen. If I like what I see, then I'm going to ask them if they still have time. Okay, so pre-screen for 10 minutes, pre-screen, then book interview if they are suitable. Again, I know sometimes, yes, always pre-screening separate. Pre-screen, then book a new screen, then book an interesting. Okay, awesome. Pre-screen, then schedule interview in most cases. Pre-screen and book interview. Okay, so you guys are all pretty much in that same realm there, which is great. Because I know sometimes when it's a temp role and you literally have a candidate and you need them out the door, like literally today, then you do your quick screen. Listen, I might have this opportunity here. Love to chat with you about it, but I have about 10, 15 minutes more that I need to go through with you the question and ask you some things. Is now still a good time? If not right now, how about at the end of the day today or during your lunch hour, depending on what time you call them. So that's great. So all about the same time. Excellent. Okay. And so there's a variety of different assessment tools that we're obviously going to be looking at in order to be able to do that. And what is it? Resumes is obviously a starting point. Maybe there's application forms. Some firms have more formal application forms that candidates are filling out. Pre-interview questionnaires. Maybe telephone screen that interview. Is that part of that assessment tool on our screening? Maybe it's some web-based information. Maybe it's reading and scoring by using a matrix or a rubric, right? Again, that often our hiring managers might use or HR. Maybe there's electronic scoring, right? There could be keywords in the applicant tracking system. There could be a variety of ways of us to screen our candidates and know what those assessment tools are. And so which ones do you, outside of a resume or a LinkedIn profile, what other tools do you often use to help you quickly screen and identify the right candidate? What other tools might you use currently? Qualifying questions attached to the posting. Okay. I like that. I'm all about qualifying questions, and I love the fact that it's attached to a posting. That's great. Okay, so have they read the instructions of the job posting, right? Sometimes that gives you some identification if they're paying attention to details. Do they respond to your request? That's an indicator of how they may respond in the future. If you have that qualifying question and they don't respond with the qualifying question responses, it might give you an indicator of how they'll prepare for a candidate interview. Or let's say you request a cover letter. Let's say you request information on a variety of things. Okay, so variety of different ways. LOL, they did spell my name right. Or did they spell my name right? Okay. And we do that often at Applin too, especially if we're looking to hire internally. Are they calling us Alpine or are they calling us Applin, right? So we think about those details. So a variety of ways that we can be looking for how to screen our candidates quickly. But when we're getting the resumes, right, remember that the minute you do the work for a client, you also become liable. So the minute that the client has signed off with us, whether it's through a managed service provider, whether it was an RFP and we responded to that and we're part of their, we're on their master service agreement, whether it's a smaller company and we've signed a contract with them, you become liable. You're an extension of them. So once you make the decision to work with them, we also, like I mentioned before, you really need to set the expectation with them on everything from turnaround timeframes. How quickly will it take to turn around resumes and candidates, both for the resume review, but also on their token, interview feedback. Are we going to have access to their internal systems, or at least a listing of the rejected candidates so that we're not duplicating our efforts? Who have you already interviewed? And it's the reason why we're asking is we want to get to people quickly for you. And we want to take a look at doing that by really understanding where could there be a red flag in a candidate's resume. So when we look at a resume and a cover letter, reviewing the first step is obviously that quick screen. In the process, the resume of the candidates are reviewed and we check, for education, their work experience, overall background matching, the requirement of the job. Does it fit? Does it not? Does it fit future jobs, if not this job? And then while we're doing that, we want to keep some of the following points in mind that you see on the screen here. Right? Job hopping, missing dates, no education if required, absolutely no discrimination. Again, upholding the integrity and the standard by absolutely not that. And I've had clients, and I'm sure a lot of us, if we've been in the industry for a while, have had clients who've asked us for unreasonable requests. And I've been in that situation where I've had a client say, I only want to hire females. And I'll say to the client, I can't, I'm going to bring you the most suitable candidate for the job regardless. Eventually, I ended up actually choosing to not work with that client, but no discrimination. And other things that we want to think about, like I said, is red flags. And as I mentioned, and if you haven't already done the ethics course, there's really good reason to make sure that we're identifying red flags, but we're doing our reference checks, and because of those liabilities. And I don't know about other firms, our firm, we're contractually obligated to do reference checks, whether the client does it themselves or not. We always do reference checks, even if the client says they don't want them, don't need them. Why? Because of liability. And also because we want to make sure we're bringing the candidates forward who say they truly are. To some degree, we know that references aren't always foolproof, but it's a starting point. And we want to think around in that resume, where are the red flags? And by design, they are very personal documents where they do have free rein to describe their skills and experience. And there is that ambiguity. And as I mentioned, it seems like today, more than ever, are we seeing fraudulent fake resumes of candidates. And actually, I'd like to know by a yes or no in chat, are you seeing an influx of fake resumes? And if you're not sure exactly what that looks like, there's great stuff you can Google, but are you seeing that? An influx of fake resumes. So it could be the same candidate who has 3 different resumes that they've submitted and changing the name, changing something a little bit different, but you recognize there's something looking very similar here. Our resumes have been copied and pasted, and people are just stealing others' resumes that way, basically, and not describing who they truly are. So I'm curious in chat, yes or no, if you were seeing that. So no, okay, you're not seeing that. Okay, so I'm seeing a couple no's. Okay, interesting. So it also might depend on the type of desk that you operate. What we've seen, and this isn't just an Alpine thing, this is a kind of an industry thing, is for some reason, it seems to particularly be more prevalent in the IT sector, where we're seeing a lot of these resumes. So it's just good to really make certain that if you're screening candidates, really digging deep to understand, is this a legitimate candidate and they are who they say they are? And so what could be an example of a red flag in a resume? What could be an example of a red flag in a resume? overlapping job dates, time gaps, spelling errors. Okay, let's keep going. Let's see how many you guys can quickly come up with. What do we really need to look for? My client has had some show up for work who was a different person that they interviewed. That's exactly it. That is the fake candidate, the fake resume. And so one of the ways that we've tried to mitigate that is by saying to the candidate, let's book a face-to-face interview in our office. And then usually they don't respond back to that. But that's interesting. They showed up for work who was a different person that they interviewed. Okay, so lots of potential red flags, overlapping dates, not information on their education. There could be job titles that have kind of jumped back and forth, no address. A lot of people now aren't putting their address, but they're more for safety and privacy reasons, but they'll put their city, their phone number, their email addresses, their LinkedIn profiles. Another red flag, if you try to find somebody on LinkedIn or any social, most people these days, like when try to identify a fake candidate, could be looking in those areas. They're again switching jobs regularly. So were they on temp? Was it clearly outlined on their resume that they were temp? Are they going backwards, right? Were they a Reiki master and then a director of marketing and then a medical receptionist? Are they kind of bouncing back and forth? So really thinking about how do we identify those candidates and realize that our job is to weed out those red flags. Because if we don't, who will? If we don't identify those red flags, who will do that? Who will find those red flags if we don't? The client, okay? And then we look bad, right? At the end of the day, we look bad for not doing our part on really delving deep into every single aspect. And if there's not enough information on the education, for example, I say to them, we always do an education verification check on all of our candidates. Is there anything that, that would kind of, prevent us from being able to do that if you're suspicious, right? If there's something that's not sitting well. So we already took our break time, so we're going to hop on to the next part of it. Now, I really would love to ask somebody to come online. I'd love to kind of engage you guys in a direct dialogue. And by doing so, I'm going to ask some people to come online if they're comfortable. And if you're not, just let me know that you're not comfortable. But one of the questions I wanted to ask is, how do we determine the quote unquote perfect candidate? And maybe I'll ask Jody. Are you comfortable, Jody, coming off mute and sort of sharing on what do you think we would need to do to determine the perfect candidate? Oh, she's in a public space. Okay, no problem. How about Tyler?
Hi there.
Hi.
Finding with the most qualified candidate, sorry, what was the question?
Like, how do we determine the quote unquote perfect candidate?
I think from my experience, to see if their skills and abilities match the job description that we put out, and whether or not through interview they can answer the questions that are most relevant to those skills, qualifications, and abilities.
Okay, excellent. So really matching it against the skills, the qualities, the capabilities, but also remembering it was kind of a trick question. So you were 100% accurate. But again, if we're looking for the perfect candidate, we may not find them. So our job, yes, we'd love to find them the perfect fit, but our job is to find them qualified, people who are well qualified for the job, and to really understand what we're looking for that is well qualified to personality, to the fit, and to the culture. In addition, by doing that, based on exactly what Tyler said, really measuring them against some of those things. So there's going to be key factors. Number one, skills. Can they do the job? Right? That's the technical. Can they do the job? Maybe it's their education, that's a given. Can they do the job? But what about their capabilities, right? This often comes down to how well can they do the job? Not only do they have the skills, but how well? So the skills are the must-haves. The capabilities might be the nice-to-haves. How good are they? If they don't have the skills, don't bring me the candidates, right? In the client's mind. And the capabilities, well, what can they do that makes them stand out, that compares them from one over the other? And then the motivation. Why do they want a new role in the first place? Just because they sent their resume to us doesn't mean that they're actually that motivated. Were they having a bad day? Were they upset with their boss today? Did they see the job and go, hey, that's kind of neat. I'm just going to apply to it because it takes milliseconds to do that. Or are they legitimately looking for change? Do they have a wound? Do they have a pain point and a real motivator to make a change? Either to start something new, maybe they're in between contracts or in between temp assignments, or they want to leave their current situation. And so what is that? So I'd like to ask you in chat, which of these three key factors is the most important one? What is the most important one? So I have a couple motivations. I have one skills, motivation. Motivation, will they stay? Okay. So motivation is the most important one, because if they have the skills, that's the given. And they could also be the best at those skills. Right? They could be that person that is that needle in a haystack, that purple squirrel that that client is so looking for. And you've dug them and you found them and you've spoken with them. But if they're not motivated to make a change, if they don't have a valid reason to join your company, your client's role, then you have no placement, right? You can't force them. You can't squish a square peg into a round hole. So that is the most important factor in placing a candidate. Are they motivated? But let's look at the assessing of candidates. So again, the skills. Clients are often seeking to employ skilled individuals who already know how to do the job, right? This is the basic assessment. This is the most binary relative. Can they do it or can't they do it? Then there's those capabilities, as I mentioned. How good are they at it? So you want to dig questions. Not only do we dig and get all the skills and everything that may not even be on their resume, so we've got the right candidates, but what about that assessing that? How about understanding, what makes them the best XYZ in their company? What makes them the go-to person? How would they rate their capability in, software development at a scale of 1 to 10? How would they rate themselves? What kinds of performance appraisals have they received? What would their references say about them? What would their manager say about them? What was the last project that you led? What was your role in that project? Maybe you're a salesperson. What kind of sales results do you have? What kind of marketing projects have you executed? Right? And that also comes down to us knowing what good looks like. So our experience of talking to so many candidates and making placements and working with clients will get that fluency on what typical candidate could be exceptional, right? We might ask them competency-based questions. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced? How did you deal with it? Kind of like the STAR method, and asking them questions around their overall successes and accomplishments. And then that motivation, as I said, it's the most important assessment. And if you have that quote unquote perfect, and I know there's no such thing as perfect, but if you have the ideal candidate and they back out or they turn down a job, maybe it's because they really weren't motivated. It's that expression, you can lead the horse to the water, but you can't force it to drink. You can lead them to the trough, but you can't force them to drink if they're not thirsty, if they're not ready for change, if they're not excited about your job. Maybe we didn't have enough information because our job intake wasn't great. We didn't have enough information to get them excited. We didn't have enough information to really prepare them for the interview. So they really were like, I'm not really sure I'm that motivated, and they didn't present as well as they could have in the interview. So that's going to be the factor that's really critical in that stage. And so, as I mentioned, the motivation. And when we think about what are some of valid career wounds or motivations that a candidate might have, And when we often think about what that is, most people almost instantaneously, if I said to everyone, what is a valid career wound? Right? Some people will automatically say money, right? Money must be the wound, the amount of money accepted to make the job offer or to accept an offer. But there's reasons why money, if that's their primary motivator, they might be susceptible to accepting another job that pays a little bit more. They might be susceptible to a fall off if something better came along. They might be susceptible to a counter offer, right? There's so many reasons. If their only validation is, oh yeah, I'll talk to you, I'm always willing to listen because, hey, who wouldn't want more money? That in of itself is sort of like a, whoa, okay, is there anything else here? Because if it's truly about the money, in some instances, maybe that is a reality. Maybe they've been grossly underpaid in their current position. Maybe they've been undervalued. Maybe it is they're looking for a temp because they have bills to pay. But we really want to understand that a little bit more. And if you were to think about other types of wounds, again, in chat, what would be some of the wounds that come to mind that we might validate? So relationships, right? What are the working relationships? Do they get along with their boss? Do they get along with their employees? Is it a toxic culture? Maybe they missed out on a promotion and they're deflated. What was the reason though? Did they deserve the promotion and they're being unrealistic? Or was it, sometimes there's nepotism involved in a small family company, maybe it's favoritism, or maybe they just missed it and they're upset about that and they really want to seek something that's going to give them the promotion. What else? There's probably about a list of 30, right? Growth opportunities. Some candidates don't want to work from home any longer. They need to be in the office. Some candidates don't want to work from the office. They only want remote. Some people only want hybrid and their companies can't offer that. Maybe their schedule's not flexible. Maybe there's personal professional conflict at work. Maybe the client site is too far. They don't want to drive 45 minutes there and back every day. Maybe somebody wants to join somewhere where they can start collecting a pension plan because their current company doesn't. Right? There's so many reasons. Contract is coming up. They're not happy on their current contract. They're not happy with the agency that they work with for temp contract and want to move to a different agency. There could be a whole variety of reasons of why a candidate is motivated. Culture is a big one. The environment, the culture. So really thinking around that validity of the candidate's reason for change. And that ties back to other factors as well, right? Someone said benefits, right? Maybe better benefits, maybe they don't have benefits. Really thinking around, is that candidate motivated? Am I going to be able to place them? And do I have 1 or 2 or 3 wounds? When I'm interviewing candidates, whether it's internally for my company here, or whether it's when I was running a full desk, I would keep going until I got like at least 3, like 2 to 3 wounds. Especially if the only wound they said was I'll always listen or more money. Then I'm going to keep digging. I need more. I need more than that because there's too many things that can go wrong. If it's just I'll always listen, that means they're kicking tires, or that if it's more money, things can go downhill at the end. But other things, right? Personality, characteristics, traits, the culture. So what's happening there? Do they fit the job? Do they fit the culture? Do they fit the character traits of the organization, the character traits of the person that they're working with, the personality of their manager? What about the fit overall? So does that individual fit the job? Do they fit the person that they're also working with? Do they fit the clients? So do they all fit each other? So they have to kind of in that sort of Venn looking diagram, the job has to be a fit for the candidate. The client has to be a fit for the candidate. The candidate needs to be a fit for the client. Everything really needs to be copacetic there in order to have a successful placement, but also a successful long-term placement or short-term if it's temp. So really looking at all of the factors, there's a lot of considerations. And when we really look at the fit to the job, this is what could separate us from our competitors, from your competitors. This is the most important component. And your job is to find where your candidate will excel in all of this area here is that overall fit, and you sell that person to the candidate, to the client that way. And when we determine the fit, we're looking at, the person, organization, as well as the person and the job. So maybe that person, right, really values a really fun culture. Maybe they value something that's dynamic. Maybe they really want to be somewhere where they're known for having a really good opportunity with a company that does great things. Maybe that doesn't matter to them, but do they fit the job? Do they fit the culture, right? So if it's a fun culture that they're looking for, maybe they're looking for that collaborative culture. Maybe they're looking for that culture where people get along, where people work together, right? Or maybe they're looking for something different. And if you look at that Google, maybe it's that organization fit that they're looking for when they value the interests of that and they understand the organizational cultures. Does it fit the job? Are they in the job that they want to be in? And this is how we can help reduce some of that turnover, is to try to match the organization's business culture and the value to your candidate. Think of your candidate as your client, as your customer. Does the job and the company and the culture fit your candidate? Because a per person organization fit increases the chance of that candidate leaving. And when we focus on the candidate's values and their views on work in addition to their qualification and skills, we're able to make certain that we're making a better match. As well, one challenge that we face, as we talked about before, is the fall-offs, and we really want to mitigate that risk. I'd rather not place a candidate thinking, oh, there could be a fall off here because I'm kind of squeezing a square peg into a round hole. I'd rather not make that placement than have the risk of a fall off, because it's never fun to rework something we've already worked on and got already paid for. So that communication is key, making sure that we're trying to really find out how is this a fit for the candidate and get their feedback on understanding that is key from them. Other things that we want to be thinking about is overall interview styles. And so we talked a little bit about that screening. How do we screen them for understanding that fit and all of those things, the personality fit, the job fit, the motivation, their capabilities, their skills. When we're taking it to that next step, there's different types of candidate interview styles. And some of us have our own unique styles on running an interview. But one of the things is that there's really a huge amount of agency recruiters who really do fail to get a candidate properly interviewed. We might just do a quick screen, or we might just do a quick walk me through your resume. Maybe they're kind of writing some notes on the sides of the resumes. And it really gives us, if we're not really running a proper structure and a thorough approach to that, we can give our competitors the opportunity to outshine us. And we don't want that. We want to make certain that our interview style and what we do is getting us the best people, but there's a way that we have to do that. And so this is the unstructured. So when I have an image of that fancy pinball machine, what does that convey? When I have a fancy pinball machine in the image here, when it comes to an unstructured interview with our candidates, what am I trying to convey in that fancy machine? What can that have to do, right? It can go all over the place, right? An open discussion. What else can that demonstrate? Not a quality interview. It's kind of taking a shot in the dark, hoping it works. Hopefully, right? It's unorganized. It could be frenetic. It could be frantic. Lots of, alarm bells going off, ding, 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 right? A lot of sensory overload, clustered. Okay, excellent. And so I do like to use a lot of imagery. Negative impression. Okay, it's all over the map. Right, you're coming into it, and recruiters are really good at conducting an interview like a pinball in a pinball machine. Different topic, but we're also really good at conducting a client meeting like a pinball in a pinball machine, and also our job order intake. So the more structured we are, the forms that we use, following something that's consistent, will make certain that we're selecting candidates based on that matrix example that is using a structured way. So an unstructured approach is, right, it's without a set format of predetermined questions. Some key questions prepared in advance, such as, so tell me about yourself, could be as simple as you need. But we want to think about how do we go beyond that, right? If we come in and we say, well, okay, I've got some key questions, but so tell me about yourself, is unstructured. The candidates don't really know how to respond to that. It's a great question to ask them, by the way, though, because most of our clients will do that when they interview them, and you want to hear how they respond, but you need to go way deeper than that. Different questions may be asked of different applicants because interviewers formulate questions based on the interviewee's responses. So yes, that is part of it, but we need to be asking the same consistent questions of our candidates for each role, so that we're really know that the candidates we're bringing forward for that role for our client, we've really been able to validate the right ones. And it lacks the reliability and the precision of a structured interview. My personal style, when I started off in the industry, I think I scribbled notes on the side of the resume, on the back side of the resume, maybe on loose leaf somewhere. There was no rhyme or reason. And I had fall offs, and I had clients kind of saying, nope, not the right fit. Nope, not the right fit. Nope, not the right fit, until I actually got properly trained and really learned. A structured format with tailored interview questions really can help us make sure that we understand the candidate for the role. And just examples, right? And some companies have interview forms, some companies don't. My recommendation, if you don't have a really structured form, is to really think about structuring one that you can have some, you can change it up a little bit. And this is just one that I took off online somewhere. But what is that education background? And maybe give your own rating system, right? 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you guys use things like Bullhorn and different CRM systems, you can have some of these resumes that get pulled right into the CRM. So you're typing away as you're interviewing the candidate right in the system. Prior work experience, technical qualifications, really making sure that you're going about that structured approach. And it just helps to formalize things. And when your client comes back to you and they say, okay, we've got these 3 candidates you presented, walk me through each one. Why would you choose this one over that one? What was it about this person's experience over that person's experience that you qualified them more? Which of these 3 would you choose when the client asks us that? But if we've been running an unstructured approach and different questions and different responses for different candidates, it's going to be really hard for us to be able to do that. So when we think about that structure, it's really important. All candidates are asked the same predetermined questions, and bias is reduced because candidates are evaluated on job-related questions, which are based on an analysis of job duties, requirements. It's subjective, and irrelevant questions are not asked. You might ask some ad hoc questions based on their responses, and you might delve a little bit deeper and ask them things that are unique to them. But having that free-flowing type questioning in conjunction with structure. And whatever I did for all of my jobs that I worked on, and I worked on like hundreds of them over the years, is I have my format, and I even did a little bit of tweaking in some of my my interview forms, like adjust a question here or there to make it really tailored based on the client's qualifying questions and the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, so that I'm really getting an accurate picture of, am I truly bringing them the best person? By a yes or no in chat, how many and again, there's no judgment because every firm has their own unique style and one's not right over the other. I'm just sharing with you some best practices on what could happen if you don't use structured, but how many do use structured interview forms or a blend of both? Okay. Awesome. Okay. Great. Love it. One of the things that I also did is because I was running a sales desk and I had different areas within sales, and I also ran a marketing desk. I had a marketing interview form, I had a sales interview form, and I had a sales manager interview form. The structure looked identical, but some of the questions were unique even in that perspective. So I just grabbed the right one based on the interview format, because even 14 years in, you could have an off day and forget to ask certain questions. So I always wanted to make sure I asked everything I needed to ask. And then the interview structure. Even though we may be interviewing numerous candidates each week, it is still important to acknowledge the need for good interview structure and to really follow that. As I've mentioned, it gives us a greater opportunity for consistency and accuracy. One of the downfalls of doing something frequently can also be complacency. And like I said, I have fallen into that trap where I'm like, oh, I already know what I need to ask a digital marketing person. I've done that hundreds of times. You have an off day, right? Maybe you're a little bit tired that day. You've got a lot of stuff going on. You've had a job that fell off. You had a job order that was canceled. You got 3 new job orders and you're excited and you forget. And yes, you can always go back to your candidates and ask them the questions that you may have missed. But why, right? Keep the stuff so that we don't deviate from the structure, because we're in danger of missing the vital information that way. So having that structure and having that overall process, this will, for a lot of us, be just refresher as well. But that overall structure, so the introduction, right? Breaking the ice, kind of whatever that's going to look like, setting the agenda. And when I have an interview, I look at that just the same way that I would consider a client meeting. And whenever I had a client meeting or a job order intake or whatever that was going to look like, I always would set the agenda, because it gives clarity, it gives structure, it could help you get back on track if something kind of goes off the rails or goes into a different direction. And it just set expectations. And I do the exact same thing with a candidate interview, setting the agenda. We have 30 minutes together. I've got lots of questions to get through, want to make sure we can get through everything with accuracy, or 45 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever you've set up. So I'm going to make sure, candidate, that I bring us back on track if we get a little bit off track, really ensuring that it will help us conduct that. And then other things, obviously the 2 opening questions, some of the things that I like to ask about again, is maybe give the candidate an opportunity to brag about themselves, to share a little bit about who they are. Again, that tell me about yourself is important. Or please think about, significant career accomplishments, what are your highlights in your career? You might give them something just to kind of help them relax a little bit. But to tell me a little bit about yourself, as I mentioned, I wouldn't want to have an unstructured interview and that be the only question I ask. But I do like to ask that question early on in the process, because as I said, the reality is when they go to meet your client, that is often one of the toughest questions for a candidate to respond to, but it's often the very first one your client's going to ask them. So I want to know firsthand, how might they respond to that? And if they had a really challenging time responding to that, when I'm preparing them for the interview, I'm going to offer a little bit of coaching support around that. Then we look at the skills assessment, the capabilities, so digging into their resume, ask them questions specific to their skills. Anything that's not on their resume, let's walk through the roles. Describe to me what you do as if I don't know anything about that. On a scale of 1 to 10, are you an expert? How do you understand this? Any mistakes you've made at work that you regretted? How would you rectify that? What else have you done in your career that you're proud about? What have you done to help your company make money, save money? Have you brought new ideas to the company, right? This is that opportunity to really do that capability assessment, maybe some behavioral situational type questions. Maybe your client has had a really bad experience. If you're doing a leadership role and they've had a bad experience with the previous leader, walk me through examples of how you would get started on your new team. How would you set the stage? What are some examples of where you've had a bad scenario with a client, where you've had a bad scenario internally, right? That situational, kind of that STAR method. And how important is money versus job content? So lots of different kind of questions. What are you looking for? Are you willing to look for an opportunity that's 5,000 less if it gives you're closer to home? So stretching the interview. Which 5 companies would you like to work for and why? Have you ever applied there? When was it that you last applied? What is your current base salary? What was your last bonus? All of those types of things, or what kind of salary range, I should say, that you're looking for. Really just kind of exploring that, and then telling and selling, asking them, right? This is the opportunity for them to really shine and really delve a little bit deeper on. If you have a position that you want to sell them about. So this is when you tell them about the role, you sell them on the opportunity. Hopefully we've got a thorough job intake. We've done research on the company. We can get the candidate excited. Remember, they have options. You're not the only option that they have to look at. So how do we tell? How do we sell? But then give that candidate the opportunity to also shine on how would you fit in that position? What is it about that role that excites you? How do you feel that you fit that role? Is there anything in your background that you think could be a hindrance for that role? Doesn't mean that we wouldn't present you, but asking them some really good questions and making certain that you've also set some expectations with the candidates as well. We need to get referrals. I need an updated resume. I'm going to send you some qualifying questions to respond to. In the next 24 hours, can you send me 5 bullet points on why you're fit? Can you send me a whole list of the skills that you think are directly applicable? Whatever kind of homework you may give them. And you may not give your candidates homework. I always did. It was for sure a best practice to make sure my candidates had skin in the game. They were truly invested. They weren't wasting my time or my clients' time. If they didn't tweak their resume and get back to me in 48 hours or 24 hours, if they didn't send me 3 bullet points, some of those things I did use as a test. Also recognizing that sometimes you really got to get the candidate out the door the same day. So I can't really use that same kind of tactic, but I still want them to send me some things like an updated resume that I could later send on, or reference checks. And then kind of any questions that the candidate might have, and then closing, right? Obtaining any kind of closing that you need with that candidate, whether you have a job for them or not. So fairly straightforward process, but a lot of things go into that. And then if we only have time to do a 10-minute interview, we're skipping a lot of stages. So really thinking about, if your current process is 10 minutes, can you squeeze an extra 10 minutes into your day so that you mitigate the risk of not getting the right information to them and things happening at the end, right, where you're not going to be happy. And then some of the structures that we look at, most frequently used types of structured interviews is that behavioral. And I do take that blended approach, as I've mentioned, when I'm interviewing candidates. I didn't always do behavioral interview with candidates. I started to over the years, as I started to realize that a lot of our clients are really taking that behavioral situational style of interviewing. And a lot of people don't love them. Some people love them and they thrive on them, but some people really dislike them because it forces to think back in time, and it forces us to go back. And sometimes we have a really hard time on coming up with answers, and we're not happy with those are. But these are the types of questions that our clients are often asking our candidates in the interview. The trickiest ones are for them. So if we think about, even asking 5 of these styles of questions in our interviewing, we know how well that candidate is going to potentially respond to that, or do they really struggle? Do you have to coach them a little bit before they go to meet with your client on some of those things? Maybe you send them the list of the famous 50 behavioral style questions that you can find online, and you work with them on that. But this is something that the clients will often use, and it's really dictating past. What have they done in the past? And certain style of questions like that is, tell me about a time when you've had to work with a difficult client or an unhappy coworker, how you were motivated, how you motivated others to an outcome, when you solved a problem with little guidance, when you had to persuade leadership to make an unpopular decision, when you showed initiative, when you had a disagreement, when you went above and beyond, right? So looking at the different examples of this and asking some of these just helps your candidate get into that mindset of, oh yeah, these are hard questions. And then what we need our candidates to do before meeting our clients is practicing them and writing down responses to some of them so that they're really ready. They put their best foot forward when they meet with your clients and increase the chance of them getting the job. And some of the techniques around that, and we're not going to delve too deep into it, but is the STAR method. And what I've always done is I've sent candidates the information around the STAR method about the 50 famous questions. You might have specific questions that are relevant to the client that you could help discuss with the candidate. But I do like to hear for how do they respond to some of these things. And the STAR method really is describing, what was the situation? that the candidate tells you, well, I went above and beyond and I did this. And the task that I had was I had to do this. And then the action I had to do to achieve the result was this. And then what was the actual result? And what did I learn from it is the L. So the STAR L is a very popular method for our companies, our hiring managers, and especially HR. They're often using this method. So the behavioral style interviewing. In chat, I'm curious, yes or no, do you inject behavioral situational style questions into your interviewing with candidates as well? Okay, I see a yes. No? Yes, always. It depends on the type of job. Okay. Any others? Okay, so yes, always. For GL. What is, okay, so no. Okay, general labor, gotcha, okay, thank you. All right. So excellent sort of thinking. If you don't already do it, if there's, maybe that's a little takeaway, is to think about how can I add some of that so it helps you understand how your candidate may respond in the future. It helps you understand how you could help them when they meet with your client. And then also there's the situational interview, which actually predicts the future. So our clients may do both. What happened in the past and how did they overcome that? Or what did they do? What would you do in the future? And so we don't want to confuse the two styles. But if we inject a little bit of this as well into our style, again, these are really tricky for candidates to respond to, but our clients are using these all the time. And more so, yes, they're asking for skills. And in some jobs, it really comes down to the skills at the end of the day. But some clients, when they're assessing for culture, when they're assessing for environment, when they're assessing for team fit and all of those things, long-term, longevity, succession, all of that stuff, depending on the role, especially in leadership style roles as well, these situational questions become really important. What would you do if? So one is what they did in the past, one dictates the future. Specific tasks and behaviors related to the job are identified and then used to form questions on how they would behave in a situation. Things like, tell me about a time when is the past. The next one is, what would you do if? What would you do if you made a mistake that no one else noticed? Measuring integrity. What would you do if you were asked to perform a task you've never done before? How would you go about it? What would you do if an angry and dissatisfied customer confronted you? How would you resolve their concern? So when you get to understand your client, and you know their hot buttons and you know what's going to get them excited about a candidate and how you land that right candidate for them, it's that candidate is going to be fitting with the types of questions that you might ask them, but how your clients may be interviewing them. So because I was in a position to be able to get pretty lengthy job intakes, I knew, right, really what kinds of questions might they be asking. I don't know foolproof 100%, but I can start getting a sense on the client and what kind of questions are they asking me when I present a candidate to them. Well, does the candidate this? Do you know about that? Okay, well, no, I don't know about that, but now I'm going to be asking candidates that. And those are the types of questions that candidate might also anticipate when they meet the client. So really thinking about that stuff. Any questions? Okay. So we're going to go through a little bit of a quiz, and I'd love to see a lot of responses in chat. And I'm going to ask you if you can ask these certain interview questions. Again, thinking about what's bona fide occupational requirement, thinking about human rights, thinking about code of employment standards, all of these things. I'd love for you to tell me if you think that you can ask these questions by typing your responses into chat. So can you ask these interview questions? Yes or no? Are you a Canadian citizen? In fact, actually, the answer is no. The answer is, are you authorized to work in Canada or do you require sponsorship? The second one, what languages do you read, speak, or write fluently? Yes or no? What is your, which ones do you, yeah, okay, fluency. Okay, that would be a yes. What days are you available to work or any restrictions on working certain days? Okay, brilliant. You guys are also smart. Are you a member of a professional or trade group that is relevant to our industry? Okay. How old are you or when did you graduate from high school? All caps, no. Okay, excellent. But in some cases, you may need to ask the question, are you over the age of 18? Right? Someone's going to apply at Moxie's and they want to serve in the restaurant, alcohol, you need to be of age, right? So you can ask things around that. Or my 15-year-old daughter who's waiting to get a job when she's 16, they could ask, they can validate that. But are you over the age of 16, not what is your age? How about this? How much longer do you plan to work before you retire? Okay, you ask the question, what are your long-term goals instead? I see you worked at ESSO. Do you know John Smith? Oh, you guys are a smart bunch. Usually everyone says yes on that one. And the reason why it's a no is that, number one, it could provide you with a favorable reference, but you don't want that candidate to be like, oh, well, did you interview John Smith? How do you know John Smith? And that person all of a sudden clamps up and is like, oh, I'm not feeling so comfortable with this now because they know John Smith, who also happens to be my boss. Right? So we got to be careful with that. Now it's very easy to want to drop names and go, oh, I know so-and-so there. Don't want to do that. Have you worked or earned a degree under another name? Okay, I see yes with a question mark. Not an interview. The answer is actually yes, that you can ask that, especially if you do education verifications. Do you or do you plan to have children? Okay, excellent. Can you get a babysitter on short notice for overtime or travel? Okay, the answer is no. You'll be required to travel or work overtime on short notice. Will this be a problem for you? Who is your closest relative to notify in case of an emergency? Yes or no? The answer is actually no. Instead, you would say, in case of an emergency, who should we notify? Right? We're making an assumption that they have a close relative. What if they don't? Right? What if they are on their own in Canada and their family lives somewhere else? So in case of an emergency, who should we notify? What do your parents do for a living? Yes or no? An absolute no. Guys, I've been asked some of these questions over my years. So what do your parents do for a living? No. Tell me about how you became interested in X industry. How about this question? Are you vaccinated? Yes or no? Okay. Okay, that would be a no. Some employers have a vaccine policy. Are you comfortable with that? Okay, excellent. Another couple others. If you get pregnant, will you continue to work? And will you come back after maternity leave? That would be a definite no. We always had a man or a woman do this job. How do you think you will stack up? It's a definite no. What do you have to offer our company, or what do you have to offer our client's company? Sometimes, guys, you have candidates that come back to you and say, wow, that interview was weird, right? I got all of these strange questions asked from the company. I'm not even sure if they're valid. And we need to know what they were, and then we need to politely educate our clients. So I've heard this all, I've seen this all. And so we have to make sure that if we're hearing that from our candidates, to say, client, you may or may not know, but it's not okay to ask somebody if they're going to be going on mat leave soon. Okay. Have you ever been disciplined for your behavior at work? Okay, I've got a heck no. I have a yes. In fact, that one is apparently it's an okay one to ask. Do you smoke or drink? Okay, it's a definite no. Okay, that's a definite no. But what some clients, depending on the role, is in the past, have you been disciplined for violating company policies for forbidding the use of alcohol or tobacco products, given the situation? Bona fide occupational requirement only. Are you able to reach items on a shelf that's 5 feet tall? Okay. That one is a yes, bona fide occupational requirement. How much do you weigh? That would be a definite no. How many sick days did you take last year? That one is a no. Instead, how many days of work did you miss last year? Are you able to perform the specific duties of this position, or do you have any restrictions allowing you to perform the duties of the specific role? Just a few more. That one is a yes. Are you able to perform the essential functions of this job with or without reasonable accommodations? That one is a yes. Are you able to start work at 8 a.m.? It's a yes. Are you willing to relocate? It's a yes. Have you ever been convicted of fraud, theft, and so on? Okay, so for that one, it's a no. Have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense for when a pardon has not been granted? Bona fide occupational requirement, I suppose, and that's, a lot of companies will do background checks. Okay, so actually this should have been, I meant to go and change this. This should actually say 2022, so my apologies there. But other things that still companies are asking certain questions around, and the times have changed, as we all know. We don't need to dwell on that in the last couple of years, but there are questions that we might have our candidates expecting candidates to respond to, and things that we may ask them. And again, because a lot of companies are still very much remote, or they've gone to hybrid, or situations have still changed, and maybe on the permanent basis. And so some of the questions, again, that are a little bit new might be, how did you approach, or how do you continue to approach building professional relationships while you're working remotely? I was speaking with a company today that has 200 employees who are all still working remotely. None of them are coming back to the office, at least anytime soon. And so that's a real challenge for them. How did you manage to work remotely? Or how do you manage to work remotely? Do you like working remotely? Do you prefer to be in an office? Tell me about your biggest strengths. How did you put them into use over these last couple of years? What have you learned about yourself while working through the pandemic? Maybe I've learned that I really don't like working from home. Maybe I've learned that, work-life balance is more important than I realized before the pandemic. Are you willing to work remotely? How about in person? If they've been unemployed, how have you spent your time? Has there been anything that you did these years for professional development? Some employers have a vaccine policy and are still strictly adhering to that. Are you comfortable with that? So just some change of questions that we've obviously all probably already have become accustomed to asking over the last couple of years. Other things to think about are potential roadblocks. For every great candidate we find, there could be potential roadblocks that could prevent us from placing them. And the sooner we understand that roadblock without identifying them, at the onset of things, it may be too late by the end. So certain roadblocks that we're keeping in mind are other jobs they've applied for, maybe that counter offer, could be contractual issues, it could be notice periods, it could be visa requirements, maybe they didn't like who they met. Maybe they've got bonuses that are due, like, oh geez, I just realized, Jill, I've got 10,000 coming to me. I need to stick around for the next 3 months. Maybe pension, maybe bad references, right? So there's lots of roadblocks, and we're not really focusing on that today, but when we understand those roadblocks early on in the process, and we ask them during the screening, we ask them even when we're just screening a resume, before we even call the candidate. There's so many things that we can mitigate from issues happening in the long run. We want to be thinking about that every single step along the way. We're going to go into the last and short section here is just on testing, checks, and references. So we're taking a look at background investigations and reference checks, and a necessary part of that selection process is the reference checking. We want to make certain that we're really following through on the commitment that we provided to our clients, that we're really making sure that we are, especially if you're contractually obligated, but even if you're not, just that peace of mind and really knowing that we're bringing the right people forward. We're bringing people forward so that they don't show up to work necessarily potentially and not even be the candidate they interviewed, that we're doing as much background checking that we can, and so that we can help somewhat try to control the outcome to the best of our ability. And so we want to be thinking around who do we do, right? Former employers, current supervisors, do we get written references? Those are kind of more of a dying breed these days, but commercial credit rating companies, maybe social networking sites. I know a lot of recruiting firms are working with different organizations that do scanning on social for a variety of things. And our clients are doing that as well. So what are the things that we always want to be thinking about is, do I have a candidate? Do I feel good about the candidate? Am I putting somebody forward that has cleared criminal record checks? We can verify their employment history and eligibility. We've run those credit checks, that we understand that we're bringing somebody. If there's certain criteria that's required, have we done our part to make certain that we aren't doing anything that's going to create liability for ourselves in the end? And the reference checks really is just to gain assurance that the individual, they've been successful in the jobs that they say they have, to validate or dispel any concerns, maybe to gain a better understanding on the type of supervision, ethics, skills that they have, and really making sure that we can get as much of a candid reference that we possibly can obtain. And it's something that we want to be thinking about is their supervisors. Maybe if you're calling a reference, listen for things from that person. Are there any hesitations? Is there a change in their tone? Is there silence? You got to read between the lines. How things are said are more often than what has actually been said. Are we using open-ended questions? Are we providing examples? Because if we don't do that, then we can also have those issues of bringing somebody forward that again can be a liability for us. One of the tips that I often tell my colleagues is that when you're doing reference checks, because there's a lot of fraudulent candidates that are out there and resumes and that stuff that's been happening, call that reference check. I say to the candidate, great, I'd love to have their cell number, but I need their place of work. Where do they work? And get me the work number. And I want to call the switchboard, if there is even somebody at a live switchboard these days, so that I can actually call, and I'm making sure that I'm truly speaking to somebody at that organization. And that's one way to instill a little piece of control. But there's all different types of employment testing. And because hiring is so time consuming for us, it's costly and it's stressful for our clients, and that's our job, is to come in. Even when our candidates have impressive resumes, we've done a thorough process with them, we've screened them, but where they might fall short is potentially the performance, because maybe there's a mismatch between their traits and their characteristics to the actual job requirements. And so they could be great, but there could be certain ways, and some of that, a lot of our clients will ask us to, issue different kinds of skill testing, or to mitigate the risk of that. Many employers will do those pre-employment testings as a part of their selection process. Of course, we want to coach the client not just to rely strictly on those, because that's only one tool in the whole process. I've had clients that if somebody didn't pass like a Wonderlic, like an IQ quiz, they wouldn't hire them, regardless of how amazing they were. And it was very frustrating. And so really, the more we can coach them on, it's one aspect, but shouldn't be the whole part of that process, would be ideal. But we're looking at a variety of different kind of tests. So there's aptitude tests, right, to test their knowledge about concepts and practices. There's personality tests, right, to test them on their traits, their feelings, behaviors relevant to a job. Skills testing, that could be things like Excel testing and like the Microsoft suite and a variety of other things. There could be physical medical tests, which again, really gotta think about the bona fide occupational requirements. I had a client that was doing drug testing. They were based out of Quebec, but the candidate in the role was in Manitoba, where we don't do that here. And so there was a whole issue behind that. And ultimately the client didn't end up doing it in that case, but is it a bona fide occupational requirement? Especially around other things, all sorts of things that we want to be considering that. But those are some of the types of tests on certain kind of jobs. And then work samples, right? Maybe it's depending on what it is. So when I was working in finding people for marketing roles, they would bring a sample of their work. Maybe they put together a portfolio and they looked at some of those things that to see if they have the right skill set and the quality of the work that they're looking for. Maybe it's putting together a business plan. Maybe it's a 30, 60, 90-day plan, whatever the case may be. But again, as I went back to saying, really, really, really to stress, if it's a medical physical ability test, we must ensure that that bona fide occupational requirement is solid, and to express that to the client if they're not aware. And so the procedure, again, it's used to defend a discriminatory employment practice or policy on the grounds that that policy or practice was adopted in an honest, in good faith, and it was reasonably necessary. So really making certain if that does surface, you go back and you're like, oh, okay, got to really make sure. And according to the Human Rights Code, to conduct a test of that nature, that BFOR has to be there. And so that's going to be something that you really want to keep in mind if that surfaces. But some of the things that our clients do find a lot of value in is those pre-employment assessment benefits. There's a lot of things that really can help them on getting to know the candidates. And some organizations like ours, we offer a lot of this for our clients. So all sorts of testing, tons of testing. We offer all sorts of background checks and online assessments as a real value add to the client. And again, the clients do use them as long as they use them properly. So it can help screen faster, it can help us assess candidates faster, it can help increase objectivity, recognize potential for the candidate, recognize, red flags as they may come up that maybe caught us off guard, maybe reduce turnover for the client, and in turn, mitigate the risk of those, pesky fall offs, and avoid a costly mistake. at the end of the day. It's not a guarantee of fit, but it's certainly something that can help the client and help us in determining how do we go through that recruitment process and that selection process and help the client make a hiring decision. So in summary, some of the things that we've discussed are resumes, right? The sources of information on what's on a resume. What do we do in our detailed phone screens so that we don't waste time, but we get the best all-around decision on the candidates we want to move forward? What's on application forms? What are on the testing and assessments? How thorough and in detail are we going in our interviews? Are we test driving behavioral situational questions? Are we using a structured format, or are we just scribbling on the side of a resume? Or are we using format to make sure we're asking consistent? Are we using a matrix to measure the candidates? Are we using references? Are we calling references? Are we making sure we're getting valid ones? Are we looking for red flags? I'd rather weed my candidates out. Even if I thought I had a great candidate and all of the references actually ended up being really bad, I would much rather have that than place somebody and damage my reputation and that of the company at the client. How about those background checks? What about work samples? Are there LinkedIn recommendations that we might want to look at? Are we looking at past placements? So all of this information is how we can gather the things that we need to do a really good job on the recruitment and selection to really showcase to our client what it is that, the value that we're offering to them. So basically, we're done. And with 3 minutes left to spare, I would love to see if you guys could all type into chat on what are your biggest takeaways from today's session. I need a better interview questionnaire. What else are some takeaways? Better pre-screening. Better interview questionnaire. Intake calls with clients. Any others that come to mind? These are awesome. All right, so again, I really do thank you for your time and for your attention. I'm really hoping that you learned something new today. If I did anything and you walked away with one golden nugget or something different or a little refresher on something, then I've done my job, and I hope that it helps you get ready when you write your CPC exam, and that you'll be as best equipped as you possibly can be. So again, a big thank you. And that is a wrap up for our session today.
Thank you.